Looks like we have a quorum, so we'll call this meeting of the Public Safety, Finance, and Strategic Support Committee to order. If we can get a roll call, please.
Arenas,
Here.
Jones, Mahan,
Here.
Jimenez,
Present.
Perales.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And first item up will be the review of our work plan. We do have one recommendation on there from staff, deferral. If we can get a motion to
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to accept the work plan.
Second.
We have a second. Before we vote, we'll go to members of the public. And just as a reminder, we're speaking right now on the review of our work plan. You will have 2 minutes to speak. First up is Tessa Woodman.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. So basically, I was interested in your group, your commission, because it's dealing with public safety. And, you know, we could say, oh, well, this is a redundancy in regards to, you know, what the other reimagining safety. But that's another story because we need a lot of work on safety. And the issue of safety is very critical in my mind as we are going forward in our climate crisis.
And so we have there's a specific item being recommended for deferral on there that you would have to speak to.
Oh, what is the specific item? What is it on deferral?
So it is, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it is for the housing and childcare options for gender-based violence survivors and reporting, an item that was scheduled to be heard and is now being deferred.
Right. Oh, okay, good. Thank you so much, Raul. Really appreciate that. Okay, good. So housing, yeah, I did see that, the housing and gender, you know, issues. Okay, good. Thank you so much. And so basically the housing issue is very critical. And that was something I meant to talk about yesterday in regards to that, because we are not addressing our housing. Everybody says they are, but the issue in my neighborhood where we're getting a hotel that was supposed to be housing. We were supposed to have housing in our neighborhood. That's where my home, that was a bar. It was a commercial bar, was rezoned residential, the west side of Stockton. And then in 2009,
yes, this isn't, it's actually housing specific for gender-based violence survivors.
Right. Okay, right. Yes, you can say that, but it's dealing with housing generically. And the thing is that this is our housing crisis. And it's part of that, is that it is part of the city's plan to put jobs instead of housing. And that is what needs to change. That's why we have our housing crisis, our homeless crisis, because the jobs need to go away. We need to become self-sufficient and learn to take care of ourselves with our food, clothing, and shelter, and have
Tessa. Next up, we'll have Blair Beekman, and I will have to ask that our speakers stay on the topic for each item. So Blair, we'll give you 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. Me, Paul, and Tessa, we can be a little abstract, but our abstractness really tries to speak to specific items, I think, pertaining to agenda matters. I just simply wanted to ask, this is a gender-based item, housing for gender-based violence issues and children's issues. Will this fall under the purview of domestic violence issues and the work needed in that area? And if it is, it probably should. And if it is, I just wanted to offer, you know, I'm learning new concepts of how peer review can work and how the city of San Jose may be working peer review police programs within the framework of domestic violence issues like this. Paul Soto, you know, he had a case of domestic violence. He could have used the good practices of police peer review programs for them to review exactly what was going on with Paul Soto's situation 6 months ago. So a reminder that it's the good work with the police peer review program that we do with domestic violence issues that I hope can one day learn to expand to other parts of the police and city and community. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Blair. Okay, we'll go back to members of the committee. See no hands raised, so if we can get a roll call vote, please.
Arenas,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Mahan,
Aye.
Jimenez,
Yes.
Peralez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. We have nothing on our consent calendar, so moves us to item D1, reports to committee. First up is the Police Department Operations and Performance Bi-Monthly Status Report.
Afternoon, Councilmember. Can you see my screen?
Yes, welcome, Lieutenant Donahue.
Thank you, sir. All right, thank you very much and good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Steve Donahue and I'm the commander of the Research and Development Unit of the San Jose Police Department. Today, I'll be presenting the Police Department's bi-monthly Operations and Performance Status Report. We're going to be covering Part 1, citywide crime statistics, and then we'll be presenting on our other matters of interest, including gang-related violent crime, the gender-based violence response and strategy work plan update, an update on redistricting efforts. Lieutenant David Naya will briefly speak on traffic enforcement unit staffing, and then I'll finish with the field status of work staffed by overtime. We'll begin with our citywide Part 1 crime statistics. As you can see, I'm sorry about that. As you can see, rapes are up almost 27% in 2021 compared to the same period in 2020. In addition, aggravated assaults are up 17% compared to the same period in 2020. I'm going to speak about both of these topics as we move through the presentation. Overall, property offenses are down, and we have a significant decrease of over 14% in larceny. Now, notably, we had a reduction of 5% in vehicle thefts compared to comparing the first half of this year to the first half of last year. And in my April bi-monthly report, we're up 49% in this area when we compared the first part of 2021 to 2020 at that time. And we addressed it as an emerging issue with this committee. And at the time, I spoke about our efforts introducing patrol checks to hotspots and working with the Regional Auto Theft Task Force. Now, by June, that number had dropped from 49% to just over 23% increase. And whether it was our efforts or more people using their vehicles to get to work with the COVID restrictions lifting or any combination thereof, it looks like the tides have turned, which is good. We've gone from a 49% increase at the beginning of the year to a 5% decrease now, which is a good 54% swing. Now we'll move on to other matters of interest, beginning with gang-related crime. In the last bi-monthly report, the committee asked for additional information on how gang crime was affecting our aggravated assaults. So we took a deeper dive into gang-related violence, and we see that aggravated assaults have actually been decreasing over the last 2 years, specifically with gang-related. And this means we cannot attribute that aforementioned 17% increase in aggravated assaults to gang crime. Now, while this doesn't give us a clear definition of why our aggravated assaults increased, it does eliminate one of the major variables that we would look at. So the increase in violence during this period is a nationwide issue. In June, July, and August, this surge was reported on by major print outlets, including the Washington Post, LA Times, and New York Times. It was on MSNBC, CNN, Fox, and all of the major news outlets covered the increase in violent crime in the United States over that period. And so we look at the most noteworthy difference between 2020 and 2021 during that period, and that's the lifting of the COVID restrictions. And so that is what we believe to be the most significant factor in San Jose's increase in aggravated assaults. Now we'll move on to our gender-based violence response and strategy work plan update. When we look at rape offenses during this period compared to the 4 years prior, we see an overall increase in rape offenses by 20%. Now, on its face, this number is alarming. But when we dive deeper into the numbers, we see that the biggest increases are in spousal rape, domestic rape, and domestic attempted sexual assault. So we're able to attribute these increases to the effectiveness of our intersectionality tool, ensuring that every reporting survivor of domestic violence is asked about sexual assault. We also took a deeper dive into the rape offenses reports to ensure that we're accurate in attributing this to the intersectionality tool. We found that this was in fact correct. As you can see, over a quarter of all reports in 2021 have occurred outside this year, some as far back as the 1970s. Sorry about that, jumped 2 slides there. So these charts show the current status of both city and countywide work items since the inception of the strategy work plan. There are no changes at this time to report under the open and recently completed San Jose sexual assault work items. When we look at the county specific items, we moved items 3, 4, and 5 from pending to in process as we are working with our county partners. Item number 4 on this list will occur later today during this committee meeting with Lieutenant Jimenez. Regarding the sexual assault Bill of Rights, we're continuing to work through the process of implementing the duty manual sections. As a matter of fact, the memo is currently in what we call command staff review, where it's reviewed by the commanders in our department prior to being brought before the chiefs for implementation. And we're expecting that somewhere around the beginning of October. The resource cards are also in process, and I know we just sent, as a matter of fact, earlier this week, we just sent the request to the printer to print up new domestic violence survivor cards at the printer's office for distribution. This committee asked us to return, during the joint city-county meeting on April 29th, this committee asked us to return to discuss pediatric SARTs and report the findings of that back to this committee. So the working group was held on April 29th, and I'm sorry, on July 26th, and it was comprised of Sexual Assault Investigations Unit, the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office, the Pediatric Safe Team, the Adult Safe Team, and the Santa Clara County Council. And during this meeting, they developed and adopted the Children's Advocacy Center guidelines on pediatric SART approvals. There are 2 most notable outcomes from this meeting. First, the increase in streamlined communication, collaboration, and reporting of all stakeholders in the SART exam process. And second, the shift from a 72-hour standard for a portion of pediatric SARTs to a 10-day standard for all pediatric SART exams. During the May and June time period, there are 62 qualified adult SARTs and 26 qualified juvenile SARTs. Of those 88 qualified exams, we saw 55 individuals move forward with the exam. Now I'll move on to the redistricting update. At this time, there are no changes to be presented to this committee on the redistricting update. We're still in phase 1. As a matter of fact, I reviewed the first draft of the RFP last week and sent it back for additional work. And we're moving through that RFP process, and we're still on track currently for the timeline listed on this slide. And now we'll move on to the Traffic Enforcement Unit staffing with Lieutenant Dave Anaya, who's pictured right there in the middle of this picture.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon. I'm here to provide a brief update, as Steve mentioned, on our traffic unit enforcement staffing model now. So as you can see, I'm sorry, next slide, Steve, please. There we go. So as you can see, our old model of deployment is a 1-team model with 1 sergeant, 11 officers, and those officers are slated to work Monday through Thursday from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. We recently added 1 sergeant and 1 officer to the unit, so we can bifurcate that team and now have 2 teams to give ourselves a little bit better deployment model. So those 2 teams will look like on the right-hand side of your slide will be 1 sergeant, 6 officers that will work Monday through Thursday from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then we'll have a second team now with 1 sergeant, 6 officers. They will work Tuesday through Friday, and they'll be on more of a modified swing shift deployment, which is 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. So that'll give us more coverage throughout the week. We cover every weekday of our commute, Monday through Friday. And we also have some overlap during our prime hours or our peak hours when schools are in session, and we look at our most vulnerable times throughout the day. When we look at traffic patterns and times of day, accident data, we did a data-driven deployment, if you will, in looking at the hours that we would deploy the officers and how we would switch that deployment. The implementation of that will be by the end of this month, so September of 2021. There was a few mitigating factors that occurred as to why that deployment didn't take place a little bit sooner. We had a sergeant that was out with a medical emergency, and then we had one that was pulled to our collateral assignment in our department COVID unit detail. But by the end of September, we will have this deployment that you're looking at on the right hand of your screen as our new model for deployment for traffic enforcement. I'll be available for any questions regarding the staffing model at the conclusion of Lieutenant Donahue's presentation. And Steve, back to you.
Thank you. All right, we'll talk about the filled status of sworn work staffed by overtime. So first, I want to start by building a little context. What you see here is a list of overtime duties at the department that are required. So these are all the duties we can't not do. For example, if an officer has evidence to book or is subject to process at jail and the hour for the end of their shift comes, they can't just leave that evidence or leave that subject. So they must complete the investigation. And as such, this overtime that you see here is mandatory. The same premise applies to report writing, critical incidents, etc. Now, as you can see in this list, though, we have two things that I want to talk about. The first is a holdover for minimum staffing, and the second is what we call mandatory staffing. And these are two separate things. A holdover for minimum staffing occurs when an officer or a civilian is at the end of their shift and they're forced to stay for up to 6 hours more to ensure mandatory minimum staffing levels are reached in the subsequent shift. For sworn personnel and patrol, this leads to a 16-hour day because patrol officers work 4 10-hour days. And so being held over for 6 hours at the end of your shift gives you a 16-hour day, which, as we know, is double the average 8-hour workday. Again, these holdovers are different than mandatory minimum staffing. So mandatory staffing is determined based on the number of projected employee work hours versus the mandatory minimum numbers of staffing. And the best example of this occurs in our communications division. So in August, all radio dispatchers were required to schedule and work 22.5 hours of overtime beyond any holdovers or voluntary overtime, while call takers were required to schedule and work 42 hours of overtime in August. This number didn't change for the, this number did change for the call takers in October, where they were scheduled 35 hours of overtime, whereas the radio dispatchers did not change. They were still scheduled 22.5 hours of overtime required. So this slide, for some reason it's being weird and it's not changing for me. Is it changed for you? Or is it still on primary overtime? There we go. Good. Okay. The slide shows a list of all the secondary overtime assignments and pay cars at the department. So the majority of these are worked on both overtime and regular time. And as an example, if there's a bomb-related incident and there's an on-duty bomb tech, then that bomb tech will come handle that incident. But if there's no bomb tech on duty, we will bring someone in on overtime to handle it because they have the special skills necessary to handle a bomb-related incident. So this is similar when we have prostitution and human trafficking operations. They're executed by both on-duty and off-duty personnel on overtime. So there's a small cadre of officers assigned to the human trafficking task force, and they'll work their regular shift on duty to execute the operation. However, in order to do it safely, you need to bring in additional personnel, and to do that, they will all be on overtime. So you're going to have a mixture of overtime and on-duty personnel to manage those events. One of the best examples of this, and especially pertinent in this time, is going to be sideshow and racing enforcement. On-duty patrol personnel will assist sideshows will address sideshows when call volume and severity allows. However, it's not uncommon for patrol to be tied up on critical incidents and be unable to respond to these sideshows. So for that reason, the department's moved to a dedicated cadre of officers on overtime, specifically addressing sideshow and racing enforcement. And in this case, on-duty patrol supplements overtime personnel. And sometimes this even requires holdovers. So as a matter of fact, this occurred last weekend when on Saturday night and Sunday morning at 12:30 a.m., there was a major sideshow at Park Avenue and Waz Way. And due to the timing of it, we had dedicated racer enforcement units from swing shift who were supposed to get off work at 1 a.m., midnight shift officers who are in the middle of their shift, and entertainment zone officers who were supposed to start at 1 a.m. They all participated, 65 units in total, and that's where they were able to box all the cars in and write over 200 citations, impound 3 vehicles, and arrest an individual. So ultimately, and probably the most key component of this slide, is the necessity for overtime to address critical aspects of law enforcement in our city. And without overtime, we would not be successful in our internet crimes against children operations or walking beats, police academy instruction, recruiting events, or even deploying our command vehicle at major incidents. In contrast to the work done on both overtime and on duty, there's some activities that exist solely due to overtime. So that's what this slide shows. Right now, our department is able to fill most of these, but not all of them. As you can see, under DUI checkpoints and enforcement, only 2 of the potential 16 DUI saturation operations came to fruition between October 2020 and today, because that's the grant year we're able to measure that accurately. It's supposed to end at the end of this month. So the reason for this is simple. Officers did not want to work them. They didn't volunteer. So without officers willing to give up their time to work overtime assignments on their time off, they simply don't happen. So you can see this effect occur again on Saturday nights in the entertainment zone, where approximately 70% of those positions are filled by overtime, with 30% going unfilled. And when this occurs, it may be staffed, rarely, but may be staffed by an on-duty officer. But again, it's rare because call volume in the downtown core at the time of easy car doesn't allow for officers to be stationed on fixed posts while priority events are pending or in action. What's key about this slide, though, and it's something I very much want to bring to your attention, is the promising aspect of the department's willingness to work overtime to keep the city safe. When you look at all the gang suppression units put out in each division, the quality of life units, and the foot patrols that are going 100% filled, that tells us that our officers are willing to give up their time off to work these assignments, often in dangerous and busy areas, to the betterment of the city. And I think that's really very commendable. And now I'm here for your questions. Stop sharing.
All right, that's the end of the presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go over to members of the public first. Each member will have 2 minutes to speak on this agenda item, which is the Police Department Operations and Performance Bi-Monthly Status Report. And we will start over with Paul Soto.
Yes, thank you, Paul Soto. Thank you for that report, Lieutenant Donahue, and I appreciate what the police department does in terms of ensuring that there's ensuring that we're safe. However, that's one of the reasons why it's a sworn position versus just like a volunteer. Because when you're sworn to it, there's a particular element that doesn't exist when you just volunteer to go into work or not. And what I'm saying is that I have an appreciation for that, because I know it's because of that sworn duty position that you respond. And so I just want to say I appreciate that. But I do have some questions that I'm hoping that maybe some staff can help me ask to get answered. Is that when you have this reporting, like all of these crime statistics, these are just arrests. These are not necessarily convictions. And so what my question is to you, is there any data or follow-up in terms of, like, say 2021, you have let me see, you have robberies. Okay, 677 robberies. How many of those 677 robberies actually turned out to be a conviction rather than just a crime charged? Because I think if we have that kind of information, then we can, like, better judge what is really actually happening in the city. Because I'm pretty sure that these are just data points in terms of what crimes were charged at the time of contact with the police. in terms of the arrest point, not necessarily the convictions. So if you could answer that question, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Next speaker will be caller with the last four digits ending in 5140.
Yeah, I'd like to know where you guys find the budget for all these traffic cops. I mean, these are the worst part of your department to be deploying between during bankers' hours when it's clear that the overnight crime, especially where I live, is when the real crime happens. Traffic enforcement is just gold bricking and revenue, and you all know it. That's how you make money. So you can give it to Sacramento. You guys don't even get that much of it. It's like Gavin Newsom's tricking you guys out to give out these citations. And I'm always told there's not enough money for overnight patrol. I've been told that for the last 10 years. And all of a sudden, magically, this money starts raining out for all this overtime, just structured around traffic. Because it's the only crime that you people are able to solve, that and the people driving in the circle or someone with a beer in their hand, right? That's what you guys do. That's why people don't like you, because you guys aren't there when the real crime happens, nor do you press for prosecution. People have cameras catching people's license plates and facial features. You guys do nothing, and you have to have that camera for you guys to even do anything. And when someone shows you someone committing a crime in the neighborhood, you guys say you don't have enough people to do it. But man, all of a sudden, TEU. You want to use an acronym because it's embarrassing to say traffic cop. I mean, when you think of traffic cop, what do you think of? I mean, anybody sitting there, including you, McDonough, what do you think of when you think of traffic cop? It's not a positive thing, is it? It's a negative thing. And if you think that that's fighting crime, you should think again. You should really think again if that's all you guys can do is increase traffic cops.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Tessa Woodman.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to thank both you, Raul Perales, and Chappie Jones for really, handling the meetings where you let us know what the topic is and help us get back on topic. So thank you both for being good leaders in regards to running these meetings, both you and Chappie. Wanted to thank you both. But getting back to the topic of policing and all of the horrific things that are happening in our neighborhoods and our communities, and sexual assaults and home-based assaults between husbands and wives and things like that is so disturbing. And I think we really they say that that COVID brought a lot more of that. And, I guess that's what the report is even showing us. And I think we really have to look at, especially it's costing us so much money more for so much more policing and overtime and everything like that, to looking at the roots of these problems. And one of the problems that really needs to be looked at is universal basic income, so that the stresses of these families that cause the violence and also the lack of protection of our young people that cause sexual assaults, and to really look at that. And then also the other thing that was so critical is the people working at home. And the more that's what I found, the women, when they were home, and they said that the whole tenor of their home and stability of their children was so increased just by them being there, even if they were working, them being there. So these are the externalities that we say we need women, everybody back in the workplace, that has caused, a lot of the more increases of problems in our homes. And we need to really, I say, all people that can work at home, anybody who can work at home should be working at home, because there's benefits to our family, benefits to our environment, because of the externalities of getting to the workplace. And these are changes that we really need to put in place.
Thank you. And our last speaker will be Blair Beekman.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. I wanted to offer two thoughts about this item. Thank you for it. The first about overtime issues. Thank you for an interesting report. I can see like a way that he offered this report that actually can be really conducive to, we have to be talking about the future of overtime issues. And it's a bit of a problem. And the city of Oakland and their advocacy communities really working together on the issue to try to reach solutions. I think we have to make those same steps in this report. I think actually tried to offer a bit of that. So thank you. To offer just a simple idea, it's my understanding police officers start to get overtime immediately after, overtime period starts in 3-hour increments. So, it makes more sense. I know you've thought of it before, but can we start to think of the ideas of if a police officer only works for 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes overtime, that he gets that sort of compensation. And then after a 3-hour period, you can create a larger overtime for the officer. Just simple facts, ways to consider it. I hope that can be open conversation in the future. 30 seconds left. There's a serious issue, a debate going on, it sounds like, about the future of KSI statistics and how to talk about them well. I think some people in city government want to just be really honest about how to present KSI statistics. Some people do not. And I think we're learning how to. I understand we're at a time of adjustment. I really hope we can learn how to do this well and not compromise. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now come back to the committee. We'll go to Councilmember Jimenez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a suggestion I think that would be helpful for me. There was a lot of information presented during the course of the presentation of the information. I think what would be most helpful for me in the future, to the extent folks feel similarly, but I think after every segment that's presented, maybe allow some questions and then move on to the next section, because I'm trying to remember everything that was shared. There was a lot of information and I'm trying to think back to the proper slide. And so let me just ask a few questions that relates to what I recall. The traffic enforcement unit, I know we went from 1 team to 2 teams. It seems to make sense to me. What I'm curious about, and I think one of the callers who I didn't even necessarily agree with him, but I think he brought up a point that came to mind for me is, what can someone share with me sort of what time of day we have the most sort of issues as it relates to traffic enforcement and how that played into deciding the 2 teams and when they were going to sort of come on board and such?
Council member, I can take that question. So I agree. The caller does bring up a good point. Like our violent crimes tend to happen more overnight, but we deploy the traffic enforcement units at the time when there's the most traffic on the road. And while the sideshows, yes, they do tend to occur late at night, typically speaking, traffic is heaviest at rush hour. It's heaviest in the morning, it's heaviest in the afternoon and early part of the evening. And that, the traffic patterns is really what dictates when we put those officers out there, because their primary focus is to try to reduce traffic collisions, traffic injuries, traffic fatalities.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, right? I think sort of when school's letting in, people are going to work and then people coming home. But I guess that begs a question for me then, because we're essentially going from a model in which we had 12, correct me if I'm wrong on the numbers, but 11 or 12 officers in that span from 10 to 4 or whatever that time was. Now we're going to 6 officers in that same span.
And just to make it easy too on committee members and the public, if you don't mind, Lieutenant Donahue, can you share the slides again? And then if we're going to reference a slide, we can just pull it up. So I think that'd be helpful. And I think that was slide 20.
Who's keeping track, huh, Raul? So that's the exact slide, obviously. So 6 a.m. to 4 is the to your point that was just made. 6 a.m. to 4, we used to have 11 officers, right? And that's sort of the times I thought that maybe there'd be a lot more traffic and people on the road. Kids are going into school during that time, coming out of school during that time. And then we're going to separate teams. And then we're going from 11 officers on the street during that time to 6 officers on the street during that time. I understand the breakdown, and I think there is a need. Well, actually, I guess the overlap, but yeah. So sorry, I'm just acknowledging the overlap in the days and the time. So there
Yes.
aren't just 6 officers. So okay, all right.
It's to try to cover both morning and evening rush hours.
Right. I see that. I see that now. Okay, it's starting to make more sense to me now. So I appreciate that. Okay, thank you for that. The other question I had was around overtime. If we can go back to the slide where it showed how many folks are taking to particular sort of things that we're interested in doing, say the DUI checkpoints. And I think there's like, 80% filled, or, there's different numbers that are thrown out there. What I'm curious about is, and what comes to mind as I see this is, I know officers do what they call, and I apologize if this isn't the proper word for it, but they do the pay jobs, right? They get hired to go out and patrol shopping centers, and they can sign up for that and do all that. Can you share with us remind me how that works?
Sure. So we have a secondary employment unit. Employers throughout the city can sign up with the police department to hire off-duty officers to work security detail in a police uniform, and provide security to a private facility or a private event, or sometimes a public event. Like the city will put on large public events that require road closures and security and whatnot. And so that's how that works. And that's actually separate because it's paid for by either the business or the event.
Right. So I understand that difference. But that is when officers choose to do those, they're doing it not during their normal working hours, right? It's essentially, it's a different type of overtime. Is that a wrong way to think about it?
Well, it's not overtime that's calculated into any of these numbers that Lieutenant Donahue presented. In fact, it's not even overtime. They earn a secondary pay rate that is less than overtime. In fact, it's less than straight time.
Okay. So if I was an officer and, there was a gig, I'll just mention this because I've seen, and I've know an officer that has taken one of these jobs, and I've seen him in action. But say for example, I'm an officer, and I'm asking this just to better understand this. I'm an officer. I take the job at a local Target. They hire me to patrol the parking lot, right? I'm doing that in a little cart, working, right? Is it safe to say that doing that as compared to, say, for example, volunteering for overtime at the DUI checkpoints, that I would get paid more doing the DUI checkpoints than I would at the Target? Or does that just depend on what the going rate is?
The pay job rate, the secondary employment rate is lower than an overtime rate as paid by the city of San Jose. That's correct.
Okay. That's what I thought. I guess what I'm wondering is, I would much prefer, and I know this is obviously, it's left to the own devices of each respective officer, right, as to where they want to spend their time, which I totally respect and I understand. Have we ever, and I'm sure there's contract negotiations with bargaining units that maybe come into play, but I guess I'm curious as to can you help me understand, is there like a state law or some sort of city enabling policy that allows officers to work these extra sort of, again, I'll just say pay jobs, but outside employment, secondary employment jobs? Is there something that allows them to do that?
Yes, it's allowed under the city ordinance. And to be honest with you, that's a pretty long discussion, and I don't have all the facts at my fingertips. But yes, it's very well regulated and monitored. Okay. We have a whole unit within the police department that does nothing but monitor that.
Right. So, and I appreciate that this is a longer conversation, but to get to my point, what I'm curious about, and I'm wondering if discussions have ever taken place in which, and they get paid more doing overtime jobs within the city, like DUI checkpoints as an example, just because it's on the screen. What I'm wondering is, what would we need to do in order to say, okay, officer, you want to, earn a little bit extra money, you're required to do it internally before you can go out and do these secondary employment jobs? I'm just curious if that conversation's ever come up. And Jennifer, I think you're on the call, so, I know we're getting into the weeds here, but the reason I'm asking is I think it'd be very helpful, certainly for the residents that they've sworn to represent and that they work for and that we all work for, that if some of that time was more required internally until those are filled, and then you can go out and do the pay jobs or the secondary employment jobs. And I'm just wondering if that's ever come up during the course of negotiations or anything of that nature.
actually, Jennifer probably would have a better historical perspective than I, but I could tell you that we're not running short of officers to work these overtime assignments through the police department because of competition from secondary employment jobs. That's not an issue.
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. But it does seem in some situations like, and I'll just, because it's at the top of the slide that you have the DUI checkpoints that's, and I don't see the number, but it seems like that's not taking too well as far as it goes, as it relates to the interest of officers that do those overtime jobs. Is that, maybe I didn't hear you correctly when you said that, but is that the case, that it's just not?
That's not my understanding, but maybe Lieutenant Donahue can
okay,
give us a little more information on that.
Yes, Chief. So when we look at what the biggest kind of spread, if you want to look at, is these saturation operations. Basically what this is a grant funded program through our traffic enforcement unit to send out 1 officer plus 4 sergeants per operation. We had the funding during the last grant cycle to do 16 of these operations. So for every time an operation was scheduled, we put it out to officers and sergeants. Hey, do you want to come work this? And of the 16, we only had volunteers for 2 of them. And the reason being is that the officers just didn't want to work that particular pay job assignment. It's an overtime gig. It's not something that they're forced to do, and they get to choose how they spend, like you mentioned. They're spending their own time doing this, so they want to do something that's enjoyable for them, and whatever that may be. You know, there's, in the police department, everybody likes different things. Some people like to write tickets, some people don't. Some people like to work with gang members, some people don't. And for DUIs, there are far less people that wanted to do that than the other pay jobs available at that particular time or on that particular day.
Okay, and you would agree with the I think the comment that was made earlier is that we're not necessarily not getting those officers for those particular overtime jobs within the department because we're losing them to the secondary employment. That's not the case?
Not at all. I would argue actually that we would lose secondary employment to that because of the amount of money that they're going to get working it compared to secondary employment. It's far lower. They'll get paid for a secondary employment job on the same day for the same hours as they would working a time and a half job for the police department.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm asking, I guess I'm trying to understand why, if there's, how often circumstances exist in which someone's choosing maybe an easier secondary employment job to do that, even though you're getting paid less, rather than go work some of the, you know, what we, I'm sure as a city would see as necessary jobs within the department that are overtime, that pay more, right? And so
I can give you a perfect example. If you look at the entertainment zone on Saturdays, we have 6 sergeants and 36 officers. It's the second row there. 70% of those go filled, 30% unfilled. And ultimately the reason, it's Saturday night, it's busy. There's violence that occurs and officers want to go home at the end of their Saturday night and not stay an extra 2 to 3 hours to work a pay job at the end of their shift. They just want to go home. So that's why some of those go unfilled.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember, if I could add one more thing, you know, obviously officer wellness is a concern for us in the department and a concern for the community. It's one of the 6 pillars of President Obama's 21st century policing plan. And a big part of officer wellness is fatigue and how much you work. And so, you know, obviously there is a cost to having officers work lots and lots of overtime. And I think the officers are probably some of the best regulators of that. You know, when they are feeling like, okay, I'm done, I don't really want to work any more overtime, that is a time when they can choose to take care of themselves by just simply not signing up for additional voluntary overtime. You know, unlike the holdovers, which are mandatory, which they have no choice in, these voluntary positions, you know, that's where they can choose, you know, to go home and be with their families and rest and exercise and do all the things that you know, make a complete, whole, well person.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I recognize just inherently that we all, the department as well as the city and the residents of the city benefit from sort of self-regulating sort of officers that know when it's time to let me go home and not be out on the street when I'm fatigued or not thinking clearly, whatever it may be, right? So I appreciate that. I thank you for that. And this is just, again, these questions are just to get a better understanding as to how some of this happens. But okay, but thank you so much for the clarity. I appreciate it.
right, thank you. And Vice Mayor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Going to page 4, when I see the burglary number for January through July, I am actually one of those numbers. So for me, it was an increase of 100% for that period. So, but my question first is actually a request for the traffic enforcement unit. I know that I hear a lot from my residents, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well, around traffic around schools and speeding and parents doing illegal drop-offs. And so my request is if we can have a focus on schools and school traffic, because obviously, we want to protect the safety of our students who are coming and going from school, as well as making sure that the parents behave properly. Wanted to touch on the overtime. There's a perception, whether it's fair or not, that overtime hours are misused, overused, inefficient. And my question to the chief, Joseph, is that an accurate description, particularly looking at the primary overtime and secondary overtime? It's totally clear as far as primary overtime that, those are necessary hours that need to be spent. And when you look at secondary overtime and you look at all the functions that the police are performing, I didn't see anything that would make me want to reduce the amount of supporter hours being dedicated to those services, because they're all critical. So my first question to you is that a fair perception? And then the second question to you is, how can we, or are there ways to reduce the amount of overtime and still deliver the same level of service to our constituents?
Well, so one of the things that Chief Mata has done is require that any discretionary overtime, meaning things other than follow-up, mandatory holdovers, report writing, court, and all those things, any discretionary overtime be approved at the captain level. So that just gives us another level of oversight and another set of eyes on what people are doing for the overtime that they're getting. We try at the police department to do as much as we can to make ourselves as efficient and as effective as we can possibly be with the resources we have. We seek out any grants that we can apply for that might allow us to have some funding from outside the city sources. That's part of what got MCAT off the ground. As you see, that's what pays for the DUI checkpoints and things like that. We try to use our technology as best as we can to be sort of a force multiplier for us. The V5 technology out in your district is a great example of that, where it's a set of eyes that's there all the time that we can't position a police officer in that neighborhood constantly. And so that, anything we can do with technology is helpful to us. We try to make the best use of civilian employees in place of police officers where possible. The community service officer program was born out of a need to increase the amount of manpower in the police department without hiring more sworn police officers. And that's proven to be an outstanding program that provides great service to the community at a lower cost for those types of jobs or assignments or tasks that don't need a sworn police officer. We're trying to use civilian employees in our Bureau of Investigations to do tasks that, again, don't require a sworn police officer to do. If there's a place where we can put a San Jose police officer on a task force, which would give us greater control, or I should say greater effectiveness within our city borders by bringing in other officers from other agencies to focus on San Jose problems. We're exploring any task force collaboration with other agencies that can be helpful to us. But I mean, the bottom line is we only have so many police officers, and if we're going to do the things that the community expects us to do and wants us to do, such as crack down on sideshows, prostitution, gang crime in the city, and have officers out on foot patrols and things like that. We don't have the staffing to do it with the manpower we have. So, I mean, I think that it's a good compromise, or it's a system that's providing services to the community with the manpower, the regular manpower we have, and obviously it does come at a cost.
Second part of that is I did a little quick back of the envelope calculation. So we're spending $40 million in overtime, or we spent $40 million in overtime last year. If we just took half of that amount, I calculated that we could hire approximately 100 new officers. Why haven't we, or are we, evaluating that as a potential strategy to reduce overtime, is to increase the number of allocated positions, and how do we get there?
Well, I would love to get there. I would love to discuss that, and I think for a variety of reasons. And I'm assuming that your math is correct on that, and I'm not 100% certain. But
I didn't have Raul validated. But
actually, Paul, can I jump in on this one?
Please.
In putting my old budget hat on. So the issue with this council member is that the base ongoing overtime for the department is much lower than the actual amount of expenditures than the 40 million that they've been spending as of late. That I don't, Lisa, I think might have the exact number, but it's probably half that, or the 20-something million range. And they've been using vacancy savings to help boost up their overtime as they've been trying to work through getting officers street ready. So the vacancy savings has been going on to the overtime line item, which has allowed them to spend up to the 40 million or over 40 million for the last many years. But so we've got to get it down to get them within their ongoing base overtime before we could actually consider taking the ongoing dollars and then transferring them to hiring staff. So that's the issue and that we're dealing with. And so I know as we're trying to hire ahead, and we need to keep investing in the hiring ahead, and we only have, this is the last year of the hire ahead money. We only had 2 years worth of it. We've really got to seriously consider the hire ahead program. We'd like to get it probably ongoing into the budget. We've only got it funded on a one-time basis. And I think it was about 7 million for the last 2 years, 7 million per year for the last 2 years. But at some point, then they can reduce that reliance on that when they've got the street ready positions. But that's the problem, is they've had to work their way out of being very short staffed and not street ready. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully, Chief Joseph, I helped on that one a little bit. But it's not something that I think you just can't take the one-time vacancy savings and transfer that in when we're trying to be in a hire ahead scenario.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'll speak for Chief Joseph and say that that did help. The concept, though, the basic concept is still the same, whether it's filling vacancies or increasing budget staffing levels. Just the whole concept of, if we get to our existing budget staffing levels, or if we increase it, what is the impact going to be on overtime expenses, and where is that, for lack of a better word, where's that sweet spot in terms of staffing versus minimum amount of overtime that we'd have to expend?
Well, I think back to when I started here. I started in 1994, and I would pass a sign every day driving down the freeway that said, welcome to San Jose, population 775,000. And we had about 1,400 police officers, and now we have a little over 1,100, and we have over 1 million people. So the city council, the mayor's office, the city manager's office, and the police department itself have done an amazing job of rebuilding from a place of, I think we went as low as around maybe 850 police officers at one point, back up to the current number where we are now, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,150. But that doesn't really account for the fact that that's still about 200 to 300 less than we had when we had 250,000 fewer people. So it's a challenge. And right now we're staying constant, but we're not really growing with the city.
Understood. Last question. We're in the process of implementing several council and city policies, like vaccine mandates for city employees and other policies. And my question to you, Chief, is what would be the impact if we lost 10 officers, 20 officers, 25 officers? What would be the impact to overtime as well as just the ability to deliver police services to our community?
Well, first of all, let me just say that, we hope that every city employee, including those in the police department, get vaccinated for their safety, for the safety of those they come in contact with. And we strongly encourage that and are doing all we can to make sure that happens. But obviously people all over the country have strong feelings on this. And if there are folks that no longer are either are temporarily suspended or are no longer working here, that's simply compounding the problem that we already face. And it's going to result in a greater amount of overtime because we have to staff the streets. We have to put officers in patrol, a minimum number every day to answer 911 calls, and that's our primary focus. And so whether depending on how many, if we lose any, hopefully we don't lose any. Hopefully everybody gets vaccinated and life goes on here. But if we do lose some, we'll have to make accommodations for that, either by shifting people from other non-patrol assignments or shifting, having more folks work overtime or, I don't know this. I'm not sure the particulars of being able to change the work schedule. I don't know. I really don't know what we're going to do. And I'm hoping that we don't cross that bridge.
Thank you. I saw a report just recently that COVID now is the #1 cause of death for law enforcement officers. So hopefully that message is being communicated to the rank and file that, they need to get vaccinated, for themselves, for their coworkers, for their families, and also for the communities.
Yes, indeed. I agree.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. That's it.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Arenas. Councilmember, you are still on mute.
Darn it. Novice. Okay. Thank you so much for that report. I was trying to get all up to date and read every bit of this report because we just got it. And so I may have some follow-up questions on a separate occasion or because I don't know if I'm going to be able to ask all my questions right this very minute. But I'm going to start with gratitude because I am absolutely grateful. And I think this is a message I shared with all of you, is that I'm really grateful the progress, the movement that that the PD department has made towards creating and memorializing and integrating a lot of the center-based, victim-based approaches to the work that you're all doing, investigative and on patrol. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I want to thank Captain Jimenez. I think it's the first time I'm going to call him Captain because I haven't seen him in a bit. So congratulations for that promotion. I completely understand it. And as well as, I'm sorry that I think Lieutenant Anderson is moving on from one unit to the other, but I know the talent continues to stay within our department, and that's what really matters. And so just thank you so much for all the really good work that you're all doing. And so in line with that, I know that I think it was Donahue, you had shared earlier about how we're moving from, first of all, it was at the meeting that you all had with the DA and the Child Advocacy Center and lots of other players that deal with survivors. And at that meeting, and thank you for having that meeting through the summer. At that meeting, one of the items that resulted from it is to change our language from the SART exam to SAFE exam, which is something that is like a federal terminology, and also it just it's the difference between what we used to call Project Crackdown and now we call Project Hope. A safe exam it sounds a lot better. SART, nobody really understands, at least an acronym can relay some sense of assurance to those survivors. And so I'm grateful that this is all moving, although in that direction, although I did continue to see the SART terminology in this presentation. And so I know we're just beginning to move towards it. I hope that we can continue to move completely. And I know once you embrace something, I know you go 110%. So I appreciate that. One of the questions that I had that really stood out to me was on slide 9, we had the delayed reporting. And on that reporting, it looks like one of my questions is, what is the standard? What do we expect in terms of every year we should see, I don't know, 20% of reporting outside of when the occurrence actually happened? What is the average? Is it like 20%, 10%? What can we typically expect on a yearly basis?
Councilmember, thank you for your question. Before I answer that, if you'll allow me to apologize for the SART safe issue on the slides, I'll make sure that in the future it says safe instead of SART. I apologize for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I can tell you this, that we have not done a deep dive into, say, the last 10 or 15 years of occurrence year reporting out like we did for this presentation. We wanted to look and see if our theory on the power of the intersectionality tool held water. And so that's what we did here, is we looked to say, okay, what's being reported to us? When is it being reported? And then what year was the act that precipitated the report? And that's how we see here that we're getting this huge spread of events that have occurred, like you can see here in the slide, from 1970 all the way up until 2021. So we don't have a historical perspective all the way back, 10, 15, 20 years. But I can tell you that, so we don't have that standard that you're asking for, that 20% kind of standard. But I do know that what we're doing now is working. Lieutenant Jimenez will be on later. He's actually going to speak on D2 for this meeting, I believe. So you'll be able to talk to him about that too. But I do know for this, we could definitely positively ID the intersectionality tools, the cause for those increase in reported domestic sexual assaults.
I appreciate that. One of the things that I believe I've asked already is for us to not only take a look at intimate partner violence incidents. So, and I absolutely, I'm grateful that there is this intersectionality tool that we are now recognizing when your patrol officers arrive at what we normally call a domestic violence incident, but I'm going to call it an intimate partner incident, that we ask about sexual assault because we know that there is an intersectionality. Now, when you also respond to sexual assault incidents, I'd love to have the question also asked the other way, which, is this obviously somebody who might be at risk for sex work, human trafficking, and of course the domestic violence or the intimate partner violence, because usually a rape or a sexual assault is connected with violence. And so I'd like for that also to be explored. Can we get this on as part of our gender-based violence work plan?
I know that we are actually in the process of this. I've actually seen a draft of the new form that already incorporates this into human trafficking investigations. And like you mentioned, right, it was very one directional, unidirectional when we go to a domestic violence and ask about sexual assault. Well, now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to ask about domestic violence, and then a third way asking about human trafficking in all three scenarios in the triangle. So this is in process and we're working on it right now. We actually should be done here by the end of the year, getting these forms all squared away, the new policies written, and getting them out to the department.
Great. By the way, the graph on page 9 is a little confusing because it has the 277 reported within the occurring year, and then it goes down to 2020, and then it's 35, and I'm not sure what that reference is to.
The reported within the occurred year is the 277 is occurred in 2021 and reported in 2021. In 2021, then, so what you're looking at is that tall bar on the left there. That
Yeah.
shows you that 277 said when we received 277
Am
of
I
these
frozen?
reports.
Darn
Am I
it.
frozen? It might be me. Can you hear me?
Lieutenant Donahue, you are fine.
Okay. So should I wait for Councilmember Arenas to reconnect, sir? or-
I'm back. Sorry, I'm
Okay.
gonna get my video off just in case.
No problem. So if you look at that, the tall gray bar on the left, that's saying that 277 reports of sexual assault, rape incidents occurred in 2021 and were reported in 2021. The next bar that's only 35 tall, what that's showing is that they were reported in 2021, but they occurred in 2020. The next bar is 18 occurred in 2019, 9 occurred in 2018. And what you're seeing is that they're all being reported this year, but those are the dates of the year they occurred.
And what does that add up to? I guess I'm not sure. I guess I'm not, you know what, I'm not going to drill down on this. I'm not sure what this information is capturing. I appreciate that you're pointing out the reported outside of the occurring year. It looks like in 2019 it was 83, and 2020 it was 98, and 2021 there was an increase of 110. And so you know, I think it has to do with this intersectionality tool, but I don't want it to be the only thing. I think there's a lot of other work that's being done within the units that are contributing to that. It's asking not only these questions when there is an incident, but there's also training that has enhanced our patrol folks, and you know, the changes in the rape offenses, and so I appreciate that you're capturing that. I'd like for it to flow the other way in terms of also asking the same questions to survivors of sexual assault and human trafficking or sex work. So I'm going to move on to slide 8, and here it has. I guess I'm going to try to figure out what is the uniform crime reporting rape offense that is not being reported to the federal government that's on this list.
Under rape for the UCR reporting, it includes other sexual assault types that are, I can get you the actual section, but basically it used to be just sexual assault being rape, but now it's encompassing all different kinds of sexual assault. So if you'll give me a few minutes, I'm sure Lieutenant Jimenez can also speak to this, but I can look up the actual term real quick for you from UCR.
Sure. Well, I did look at that definition, and the definition is the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. And so that would include sodomy, or copulation for an object, and obviously rape is sodomy and foreign objects. So I'm not sure why that's being broken down separately. And the apostrophes that are around the word rape, to me don't fare well, because I think all of these listed on this list are part of the UCR reporting. And even if it was the attempted sexual assaults, then maybe what the title could be is attempted sexual assaults / rape offenses, and not put these in quotation marks. I think I said something else, but it's quotation marks. Because they may portray a different kinds of message. Does that make sense?
No, I'm not sure I understand. Are you asking us to take the quotation marks off rape?
Why is there
in the
quotation
title
marks
of the
on
slide?
rape? I guess let me ask you that way. Why are there quotation marks on rape on the top of that title?
Okay, so the reason they're at the top of the title is because rape, by definition, according to UCR, encompasses all these things, but rape by colloquial definition doesn't. So the general public would believe that if we were to report on rape offenses, it would just be the actual act of rape as defined in colloquial terms. However, because
I'm gonna stop
UCR,
you right there, because if I was raped with a foreign object, I would call it rape no matter what. And I think we need to adopt the new definition. And this new definition is striving towards equity for men and for women. And so I'd really like those quotation marks taken off. All of these items are under the UCR definition of rape. And so if you can put rape and then you can break down the kind of rape that it was, I think that's appropriate. I don't want to continue to perpetuate what it colloquially we perceive as rape. Legally, it is what really matters. And that also implies that socially, we're also going to uphold that same definition, which is a change that we must make, not only in our minds, but also in the way that we approach these incidents when we are responding to them.
And Lieutenant Donahue, before you respond, I see Deputy Chief Washburn threw her hand up. Did you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, you know what? I think it worked itself out. I was just going to offer some distinction on the types of rape. And when you look at the chart on page 8, and they have the different rows, if you will, those are all corresponding to separate penal code sections. So while UCR refers to these as rape, it is an umbrella term or a collective term that encompasses the specific sexual assault crimes, which are categorized by these separate rows. So, you know, domestic rape, if a husband forces intercourse on his wife, is going to be one penal code section versus penetration with a foreign object. So those are some of the distinctions there. I don't know if that was helpful to the conversation, but I just wanted to provide that context. Thank you.
I appreciate that response. I think that my point is still stands. So I'm going to move on and hope to not see rape ever in quotation marks. The last thing I think I covered our San Jose work items. And I'm going to the gender-based work plan. This is on page 11. Once again, I want to thank Councilmember Perales for his advocacy on Sexual Assault Bill of Rights and not having that on a long list of priority items. And so I'm really pleased to continue to see that there's progress here. The last thing is there's an expanded trauma-informed care training to reflect patterns of stress and trauma for children and incorporate survivor-centered strategies. I wanted to see if maybe Captain Lombardo is on yet and to hear who he's bringing in for that expertise.
I don't believe we have Captain Lombardo as a panelist for this meeting. We can absolutely bring him back and have him discuss this item, but I don't think he's on here for this.
Okay. I'm more than happy to connect you for the whole range of adult, from infant to adolescents. There's different agencies that have expertise in different timeframes of development. And so I would encourage a first five, as well as the county has a wonderful mental health department that has some great mental health experts. And I can send a referral or a follow-up on that. The last thing I wanted to mention, I know I said it was going to be the last thing, but this is actually the last thing. And that is, I got this email, and I believe my colleague of mine also received it, and it was very alarming. It came from Dr. Bauer, and she talked about, we have safe zones for our schools and for our community centers and parks. And when we had our learning pods around the libraries that had learning pods, so that we could clear some of the unhoused community that was surrounding that particular facility. And so that was integrated, I think, since last year, although she's expressing some support for a number of schools that have had issues where there's folks who are coming on site, who are going into the cafeteria and coming out of the cafeteria without, without any masks and without being there with any authority. And just this last weekend, there was a rape that was reported by one of the parents. And Dr. Bauer only knew about this because a parent called her. This is a college junior high. And so, this is the kind of information that's important for our superintendents to find out, or our principals to find out, because it heightens the kind of awareness that we should have around that particular school or a particular community. And so I'm going to include, and you let me know, Chief Mata, who to include in this email, but in my response, I'll include whoever you ask me to, so that we can continue to work with our schools and provide that presence, specifically at some of the schools that Dr. Bauer has indicated. And in particular, when there is a sex offense. So is there a way that that the superintendents of school districts can learn about some of the sexually based incidents that happen in or around the school when it's not happening during school hours?
Sure, Councilmember, thank you for that question. And each superintendent in each school actually has their liaison with our school liaison unit, which keeps them informed and updated as to any violence in and around the schools. And that's something that, we've done for years. We can look into this specific incident, absolutely, to see what was done or what wasn't done. And definitely, we can work through the school liaison unit in crime prevention, and if we need to bring in the Bureau of Investigations to provide any training because obviously they are mandated reporters. We can re-up that training to see how that needs to be reported, and then also bridge up again with the school liaison folks so they have
Right.
timely information.
I appreciate that. I actually had a meeting not too long ago with the Eastside Union High School District and the DA and some of the school liaison representatives. And one of the issues that is happening is because some schools have chosen not to have on-site officers, then that kind of ear to the ground is lost. That relationship building with the students is lost. And so information doesn't get relayed as quickly as it normally would have, because now we're leaving it to administrators whose expertise are not differentiating between what is a felony-based fight and just a regular school fight, right? And so I think this also may have a certain gap. I don't know, but I'm happy to support, and however this makes a difference, understanding that there is a gap for other school districts. And Jennifer, I just like to have that commitment from PRNS to respond to some of these safe zones, so that there could be some clearance for the unhoused around the schools.
Yes, we'll follow up.
Perfect. Thank you, and I move to approve.
Thank you very
Second.
much.
Second.
A motion and a second. Looks like that concludes my colleagues' comments. I'll have a couple and appreciate the presentation and in the dialogue as well. And then going backwards on some of the comments, just in thinking of the challenges that we're having. Actually, I'm hearing it as well, especially from the school liaison sergeant, in regards to the challenges that schools are having, not just with the unhoused, as we've had for years, as we know, but predominantly this past year due to COVID, as we're getting back to in-person schools, and we did make that a priority to try and clear them around schools. But much as we know, if we don't provide an alternative location for somebody to go, a lot of times they just return back to the same area, and we're seeing that around schools as well. So we're sort of back in that I think really that cycle that has no end and doesn't quite work, unfortunately. And additionally, I know that a lot of these schools, a number of them, that are having other challenges, including with unhoused in and around or coming onto campus, they have given up their school resource officers, and so they're lacking that resource and now dependent on a call for service if they need it. And a lot of times those are taking hours for somebody to be able to respond. And again, I'm hearing from our school liaison sergeant in regards to some of those challenges. So I think it's certainly going to be a discussion for our schools coming up again this next year, as a lot of those changes were implemented this year, on how are they going to deal with some of the issues on campus if it's not going to be with school resource officers, because just being able to call in 911 or depend on police officers as an as needed resource is not going to be very timely. And I think we're going to see some of the challenges that we've already seen, and this is just the beginning of the school year. Looking at the statistics to try to clarify, if you could bring up the presentation again and trying to clarify some of the concerns that Councilmember Arenas had on slide 8.
Okay, slide 8, you said?
Yeah.
Here, sir.
So I understand her concern. I think you do as well now in regards to the quotation marks around rape, and I understand why you were, why you had done that, what the intent was, and then it's obviously an easy fix. But I think getting to the understanding of the data is also important on how we might report it going forward. So in this slide, what we're looking at is a total of 407 for 2021 January to July, and that would be all things now legally considered rape, correct? Each one of these categories, or is there, or would the attempts not be included in that?
The attempts are also included. So if you were to look in January to July 2021, we reported 407 incidents to UCR under the category rape. And that's how they broke down.
Okay, so I think, yeah, just provide hopefully the clarity. I think if we, as we have these slides moving forward, I think so that way it is very clear for anybody that's reading it that all of these are under the legal reporting type of rape, and that we're saying that under that, if we wanted to have more specific data on how many of those rape reports included or were sodomy, included or were oral cop or foreign object, then that's what this slide is essentially demonstrating, is that it's breaking down, but overall the total inclusion would be 407 rape. And I actually would appreciate continuing to see this breakdown, but I think I agree with Councilmember Hernandez as well, that sort of the sense that somehow any one of these are somehow lesser or should be deemed as lesser is I think now changed with as legally as well as we're looking at the actual UCR, at least crime reporting and or criminal offense categories, I think, or penal code, right, it still has individual sections, and so I think it's important to still see it broken down like this. We can drop the quotes though.
Absolutely, I'll take the quotes off. Would it be all right if I called it something to the effect of rape reported offenses or rape defined offenses or something to that effect? Would that?
Yeah, UCR defined rape offenses, something. Yeah, I think that
okay.
That would be more specific as to what it is. Yeah.
Okay, I can take care of that, no problem.
And then if you can go to the overtime slide. Let me see which one here. The secondary overtime and pay hours slide, that one, or 23 or 24, quite frankly, wanted to speak to overall some of the challenges we see there. So first question would be, and this, I don't know if it'd be for the chief or the assistant chief, but let's say, for instance, we were able to add in more officers for full-time equivalent FTEs, and from where we're at now, around 1150, going to 1250, say 100, or even 1350, or add 250 back to the 1400 that we had over a decade ago. How much of an impact would that have on some of this overtime that is happening, or would a lot of those officers simply be going in to fill other vacancies that we've had, right? Whether it's in patrol or other specialized units, and would it really not make a major difference? I'm curious in that.
Sure. So if we added officers, and I know AC Joseph has a breakdown as to, or we've discussed where additional officers would go to prioritize those officers. One of them would be or some of these officers would go to the Bureau of Investigations to reduce or look at some of the like extraditions, crimes against children. That's what they do, investigation follow-ups, things of that nature. So again, they would go to different priorities within the department, and that's something that we're discussing. I don't know if Assistant Joseph has any further ideas as to the operations as to each bureau, where the needs are to add those officers.
Yeah, and I guess the more specific question is, would any of what we're seeing, say here on this list, would it be impacted positively, at least, where we would say, wow, we're not going to have to use overtime officers anymore for this? For instance, pay cars for minimum staffing is kind of a low-hanging fruit, right? Like if we had more officers, we likely would ultimately take that off of this list, because we wouldn't possibly need that anymore, right? If ultimately we had enough minimum staffing on officers. So that was my question. Which of these items do we think would actually be maybe pulled off of the overtime need list if we were to get more officers in, or, is that not the case? Is there just other needs that we need to be filled? And are we looking at that most of this list would still stay as a need for overtime officers?
Council member, I think, you're asking an important question, right? Because there's, more officers gives us not just less overtime, but better service. But in terms of the things that are purely done on overtime that we could do with full-time officers, like for instance, we could create a team that did nothing but sideshow enforcement, that worked on, some of the stuff related to, keeping the sideshows from coming to our city at all. We could have a full-time unit that did that. Instead of having walking beats purely on an overtime basis, we could have full-time officers whose only assignment was to do walking beats. Instead of having extraditions done by detectives on overtime, we could have a warrants unit like we once had that did these extraditions and brought wanted felons who are arrested out of our jurisdiction back to San Jose to face justice. So there's quite a few. The airport is 100% officers working overtime. There's no, other than the supervisors that are out there, there are no officers that are on straight time. We just don't have enough staff to staff it, so we do it with overtime. So there's a number of things that would come off this list right away if we had more full-time employees.
Okay, that is very helpful to hear. That's exactly what I was looking for. Some of the things I see on here as well: police academy instruction, command center staffing, things that I recall as well that had it was just a regular full-time role beforehand, as you point out, a number of them, the airport, the walking beats, which is something that I have put forward right as an interest as we do the redistricting, that I would like to see that be rolled into a more permanent position rather than something that is overtime. So I personally think as well, and I think based on what you just said, that it would greatly and positively impact the need for overtime and pay cars. And we could address a lot of these with more bodies, which then would get to what the vice mayor was saying, which is, hey, we do seem to be spending quite a bit of money in overtime, even more right now than what we have traditionally budgeted in the base budget. But we've been doing that now annually for many years because these are all the needs that we're hearing from the community that come through. And I want to make that very clear as well, and maybe you can reiterate it, Assistant Chief. The demand for these are coming from the community, correct? I mean, you're getting the demands coming from, whether it's calls for service, calls into the unit, or even through us as council members, what we're hearing from our community, right? That's where all the demand is coming for this.
100%. I mean, a great example of that is the prostitution enforcement along the First Street Monterey Road corridor. I mean, that was a neighborhood that was greatly impacted by prostitution, by rampant prostitution, and cried out for help, which we gave them. And we have not eliminated the problem completely, but it is much reduced from where it was. I would say, I would call that a very, very significant victory that the community has had, that the police department has assisted in, and that's funded almost entirely on overtime. So that's a huge service that we're providing to the community at their request, funded through an overtime project.
Yeah, and I obviously know that intimately because that's right in the heart of my district and in an area that's greatly challenged. And whether it's with gangs, but prostitution has been the really the number one issue, and it's happening in and around Washington Elementary School. And so I know the community there, the neighborhood association, has greatly appreciated when there is extra attention on that, because it does really stymie that issue, but unfortunately does not completely go away. And maybe this and the need for extra overtime and all this as well will come up as we talk about some of the reimagining issues and other ways that we deal with some of these things. Clearly, we're talking about it with schools, right? As school districts have made the decision to maybe remove some SROs and are still dealing with challenges. And again, all of that I think goes into this. If we're not going to be wanting to utilize overtime or utilize officers in certain circumstances, we need to have other solutions. Otherwise, we're going to still have more problems. And in this case, I think, considering we are the most thinly staffed, not just police department, but city, any big city, we have a need in general to get rid of some of these overtime needs by just beefing up the base staffing at a bare minimum, and a number of these things are things that aren't going to be done by anybody else really than officers. And so I think there's a huge need. Unfortunately, we're spending a lot of money in overtime right now that I too would agree that I'd like to see if we can roll that over into more of a base budget and see if we can get some of those things taken off. If you can go to slide 24 now, the next slide. So in regards to this, and I know Councilmember Jimenez was talking about it on the trade-off, and I think you answered it well in regards to the choices that are being made. And I know we're facing that issue right now, specifically with the entertainment zone officers and not having enough to fill those positions, which is not something we had a challenge previously. And now after COVID, though, this 1 year sort of off, it has been a real challenge, I think, because a lot of officers had found maybe other places to tag on some overtime. Although that whole list that we just looked at on slide 23 has provided a lot more opportunities for overtime. And I would agree with you. It's a pretty simple decision if you have an opportunity for some overtime at a different time and day that is more conducive to you having some time off on a Saturday night or a Friday night. And I would agree too that, as you mentioned, but just to make it clear, that I think the secondary employment unit and those secondary employment roles or pay jobs don't really compete with anything in overtime because the pay is so much lower than the overtime pay. So I would agree that that's not necessarily a concern. But one of the things that we have to a benefit for our community members is our duty manual that is completely accessible online. And so I just kind of took a peek at it as well while we were discussing the item. And there's section C 1500 that has all of the secondary employment policies, around 20-something pages worth of the policies in relation to it, and the mandatory hours that can be worked and when it can be worked, and so all of that is very well restricted. And I would say it's much easier, and the pay is obviously much greater when you're doing an overtime role. If we're not getting any of these overtime roles filled up, like the entertainment zone, it's because of some other reason. And I would say majority of the reason why is simply because the time typically, and then the type of the job that it is. So also, again, a challenge that I think some base staffing could help us with. Lastly, the last question, and I don't recall if I brought this up last time, but if you recall, when we will be coming back with the next update on the mobile crisis assessment team. I know we had asked for that. I'm blanking on when we'll do it. We had some more requests from community just to kind of see how that's going. We just had it, I believe, I don't know, 3 or 4, maybe 4 months ago or something like that. So was that something that we had said we'd bring back at the beginning of next year?
It's coming back November 18th, Councilman.
November. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. I just didn't remember off the top of my head. I didn't know if you did. So I appreciate you having that info readily available. All right, we do have a motion in a second. I see Councilmember Arenas with your hand up. Was that from before?
Oh, that was from before. Yes.
Okay. All right. So if we can get a roll call vote, please.
Arenas,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Mahan,
Aye.
Jimenez,
Yes.
Peralez.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Appreciate that. Next item is item D2, our police reforms work plan, reimagining community safety process status report. And I believe we have Angel leading this off.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Angel Rios, Deputy City Manager here with the City of San Jose, and joined today by Poncho Guevara, a member of the committee, and Peter Hamilton, Assistant to the City Manager. And we're here today to provide you an update on the Reimagining Public Safety Committee Advisory Committee progress. Just first, as way of background, if we go to the next slide, on June 22nd, we hit the reset button. As you recall, the City Council approved the new scope of the Reimagining Public Safety Committee Advisory Committee. And the scope pretty much falls along these 4 areas here that you see on this PowerPoint. The first one that deals with alternatives to policing really involves, it's kind of related to the previous conversation, really involves making recommendations to the city council on identification and resourcing of community-based programs and interventions and alternative city service models that will significantly change, reduce, and or eliminate the role of law enforcement in addressing some of these social challenges. These may involve both the creation of alternative emergency response systems as well as preventive approaches. And then the other two bullets, actually the other 2 and 3, concern police reform. That was the addition made to the scope of this work, and it mainly focuses on police reform and practices and reform to police accountability and transparency. These are areas where the council expanded the scope of the process. And then the last one has to do with recommendations around how do you implement this work, such as tracking, funding strategies, as an example. And instead of appointing individuals to the committee, the council designated a list of organizations that would appoint seats on the committee, consistent with the coalition's desire that the process be community-led. As you recall, the rescoping was based on a proposal made by a community coalition. The council also provided specific direction. I know the council, was very interested in ensuring that there was good neighborhood representation on the committee. So the council provided specific direction on a number of topics, including making sure that we have at least 6 members of the body that must live within the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force areas, hotspot areas, or Project Hope neighborhoods, with the option of 4 of those members overlapping with other appointments on the committee. There was a direction to add a seat to the committee, an appointment by the Billy DeFrank Center, and then directed staff to return to public safety, finance, and strategic support in September for a status update. Since that time, the committee has formed and begun meeting. Of the appointed members, a total of 4 represent the Mayor's Gang Prevention hotspot areas, the Washington Elma, 10th and William Street, Julian Street, and Mayfair hotspots are currently represented. And staff has also identified an additional 3 community leaders from hotspot areas who are interested in participating and are being reviewed right now by the committee. Those neighborhoods include Winchester Cadillac, Santee, Valley Palms. The Billy DeFrank Center has also appointed a seat, has an appointed seat on the committee. To date, the committee has met 4 times. Poncho Guevara, as you know, joins us today and will provide a brief summary of the work of the committee so far. So go ahead and take it away, Poncho.
Thank you, Chair Perales, and thank you, Angel, for that introduction. So the work of the committee thus far has been able to identify representation from, on that committee. So we took most of the month of July to actually make sure that we were able to appoint individuals, including a strong mix of individuals with lived experience of dealing with issues around law enforcement and have an understanding of the context of this. So it is, we've been able to bring the 28 voting members of that together, and that composition was only finalized with the appointment of the Neighborhoods Commission representatives last Wednesday, is when we were able to actually complete that process. So we have a full committee, and now we're in the process of organizing subcommittees to actually work on the kind of key priority areas for that. And in the meanwhile, for the last few meetings, we've been able to do kind of an introduction to the process, really laying down the scope of what we're trying to do, making sure that each of the meetings are beginning with a testimony from community members that have their lived experience with policing and centering that conversation at the beginning of each of these sessions, reviewing other recent processes that have actually happened in other cities. So we focus on 4 communities that have actually done similar processes to those here, and have some updates and both updates and highlights, both process and reform updates that have actually happened there. We had a session really diving deep into historical information on policing in the United States and some of the concepts and where San Jose fits in terms of that larger ecosystem. We had presentations on alternative community approaches to public safety concerns, looking at different models for how alternatives could be driven and scoped. did that in a basic concept. We've been doing some brainstorming around some data needs and are already starting to compile some of those. And there'll be more of that will emerge as subcommittees continue to do their work. And discussion of committee process going forward, including this formation that I mentioned before. So now that we have the 2 neighborhood commissioners and we have 3 potential nominees, we are going to be working on forming our steering committee that will be able to help make some of those directions and making sure that we are able to get everyone informed, up to speed, and get the committees working on that. We've also been in conversation, a number of folks from the reimagining process have been in regular communication with the Charter Review Commission and some of their work around, they've already been doing some really effective work and study session around different models for public safety oversight, which is a wonderful thing, because that's the structure that we would like to see enshrined in that in the city charter, and making sure that some public safety oversight models would be there. So while we've been doing our work, waiting for the neighborhood commissioners, so we have a full representation, not wanting to take action or make recommendations before we have a full active voting roster. But we have been getting ready for this next phase of our work. So that's the latest on that. And I think the next steps, I think one more slide, right? Yeah, so like I said, formation of subcommittees. We have also been in conversation with the city manager's team around identification of consultant needs. And there are a couple of different forms of consultant needs. One of them is as we've been self-organizing and doing the facilitation of this kind of on our own thus far, looking for perhaps some facilitation needs, which seems to be the focus before, but there's also going to be looking at how does the report come together for both a study session for the city council and to actually come up and do the analytical work. And we've been in conversation with different communities around the country in terms of how they organize that and what a community process could look like and what kind of consultant needs could actually help provide some really actionable, in not only actionable intelligence presentation, but actually policy proposals that the city council would be able to honor at the end of this process. So that is where we're at right now.
Sorry, that concludes our report. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. We'll go over to members of the public first. And just as a reminder, we're speaking on item D2, the Police Reforms Work Plan Reimagining Community Safety Process Status Report. And first up will be Tessa Woodman.
Oh, thank you. Well, I came to this meeting because of the public safety issue, and the issues that I'm looking at are the public safety issues of our climate crisis. And I know you're going to cut me off, but this is really critical. And the thing is that the public safety issues is what was brought up at the Charter Review Commission in terms of the third leg of the Charter Review, which was actually aborted because of the issues of the police that were brought in by our general city manager. And what's interesting about that is that this topic of preparing for our climate crisis that was actually written in the spotlight by a woman named Zimmerman. She did a very good job of really targeting the problems that are going to be hitting San Jose. And that's what, Blair Beekman has been focusing your attention on, emergency preparedness. And that is, in line with the way we need to be focusing on our safety is in emergency preparedness. And we are in a climate emergency. And what Ms. Zimmerman had reported in the spotlight is specifically the impacts on San Jose. And what was sad about what happened at the Charter Review Commission, because we were bringing up the issues of preparing and protecting the people, as we go forward, and how we're going to do that, was aborted because of looking at police. And I say that is because nobody wants to look at this issue, because it really has to do with stopping business as usual, a hard stop with business as usual. And that's where we have to focus, because we are on that last second before midnight. We have already triggered tipping points. And so we need to really be focusing on our, safety. the safety of our community, and you know, let alone the safety of all the other every other member in our biosphere that we are responsible for eliminating from our biosphere. So it's really, if we want to look at the human first, then that's fine.
Thank you, Tessa. And next up is Paul Soto.
Paul Soto from the Horseshoe. Kiwala Angel and Poncho. Thank you for your work that you're doing with regard to the reimagining. First of all, I'd like to say and acknowledge that this is an unprecedented moment in San Jose history, that this has never ever happened. You know, and while I'm saddened that it took the execution and lynching of George Floyd, there is a history here in the city, you know, namely Danny Trevino. And I don't want the Chicano experience missed on this. I really don't. You know, number two is that I want to thank Chief Mata, because Chief Mata, when he gave his pitch for this job, he had the humility at that point to say that I cannot do this alone. I need the community. I need you. We can. I can't. Now, for a leader and a person that is going for a position like that, at that critical moment, to display that degree of humility, that needs to be acknowledged. And this process is going along because he wants to do everything he can within his capacity to make sure that this happens. And so we are doing our part. However, what I don't want to happen, and I hope that this question can be answered here today, right now, is what role does the police officers union going to have within the context of these decisions and these recommendations that we place to council? What's going to happen? Are we going to place them? Council's going to approve them, and then the police officers union said, oh no, we can't do it. You know, it's against the law. So that's it. That's what I'm worried about, because that right there to the public would mean that they wasted their time, all those hours. And I go to both meetings. I go to every single charter committee meeting and every single reimagine meeting, and have been doing it since their beginnings. So I think I have a unique perspective on the issue.
Thank you. Next up will be caller with the last four digits ending in 5140.
Look, I don't want to reimagine anything. I don't want to defund anything. I just want San Jose PD to do their job versus all the fluff that you see, all the redefinitions of everything, all the parades, the toy giveaways, these phony public coffee with a coffee. You guys do all this fluff, but you never, ever, ever have increased the patrols in the Southern Division between midnight and 6. You're too good. You're too smug. You let the crime happen because, well, I guess the insurance company will cover for it, and we'll have the community service guy go out there and take a police report. You guys are the most smug department I've ever dealt with in my entire life. Snooty, you're a bunch of millionaires with day jobs. I mean, once again, how all this money fell out of the sky for traffic enforcement makes me want to puke. I mean, all this money for brand new BMW motorcycles, call it what it is. Some may think it's just a poor choice of words or not. It's pork spending, okay? That's what you guys do, pork spending. $500 million we pay for police service every year. I want everyone to ask themselves if they think they're getting a good deal on that. I can tell you, other parts of the country, they don't make the salaries that you people make. They make garbage compared to what you make. That's why when you go up to Tahoe or you're in Hawaii, who do you bump into? SJPD. Really, man, what's PD stand for? Pot dealer or pimps and drug dealers, because you guys regulate the massage parlors and the pot dealing.
All right, next speaker will be Blair Beekman.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all incredibly for this work. You know, 6 months ago, we weren't quite thinking in these terms. I think we had quite a snobbish take on how to talk about issues of reimagine. and equity. And something has changed a bit. They're doing some good, interesting work in Oakland at the same time on this issue. I think we've realized many Bay Area cities have had a tremendous increase in their police infrastructure spending or building savings over the past few years. They've got quite a tidy little nest egg developed. And with that, we do have to really seriously consider the future of emergency services ideas for this decade. It has opened the door to consider that it is good practices of reimagining equity that can better address these things. And with that, cities like Oakland and San Jose has very, very wisely realized it's time to start talking to our reimagined community, who've been practicing these things for years, if not decades, the same as equity ideas. So we're trying to put those things into place. This doesn't have to be a snobbish thing. I think we can all make good connections on what can be a different future we can be building of community-based practices. Good luck how we do this. You know my feelings about technology issues and how, like, say, Vision Zero, with its commitment to community safety, if it has open public policies with the technology of Vision Zero, that is building a democratic future. That is sustainability above almost everything else. So good luck how we work on these things. Good luck with your work with the City Charter Commission, and how there can be a way we can line up all these programs very well together, because these are incredibly important subjects for our future. This is our hopeful future. Good luck how we do this. Thank you.
I think you will come back to members of the committee. Vice Mayor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I requested that we bring this item back to our committee for an update. And so I'm going to start out with you, Pancho. Based on where we are right now, are you and the other members of the committee satisfied with the direction makeup process so far, or are there areas to tweak, improve, modify?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Member Jones. I will say that we are in the midst of figuring it out. So it's actually as a community-driven process where we have mostly a group of volunteers that are helping to describe and develop, presentation proposals and developing kind of research and self-organize. And it's a fairly large group, even though there are not only 28 or so voting members, but then there are also some alternates from different organizations, and you also have, I think, 9 advisory non-voting members, and so there's a lot of moving parts right now. So we're at the place of developing a sense of identity and how we're able to kind of work together around this. And there's a ton of incredible expertise and energy, and people are just chomping at the bit to actually get into developing really strong proposals. So I think what we'll say is that we understand and respect the fact that the City Council wanted to make sure that there was some additional neighborhood representation. And so being able to wait for some fantastic, members of the Neighborhoods Commission that were just appointed last week. And I think that's been the only kind of point of frustration. It's like, we don't want to move ahead without honoring what the council directed us in terms of having some other neighborhood voices in part of the process. But I think there's a sense of a real pent-up energy about how do we get to these particular items. I know people have been working and developing and talking about this for over a year, and so being able to get us moving forward. I think if the only other thing that I will say, to just try to be responsive to your question, I think it may take a little while we understand a little bit more about how challenging it is for the city through its procurement process to actually find consultants that can help with different aspects of our process. And I think that'll be the next charge that we take on. And so once we get into the weeds of rolling up our sleeves and looking at how we're going to be able to hire someone and how we can help advise the city in doing that through that procurement. In the meanwhile, we are self-funding and doing a bunch of different pieces and making sure that we're able to get the parts moving right now. So I don't think there is I think there is some frustration with how quickly can we get to work and when we are going to organize and develop recommendations. I think the biggest source of frustration right now is like knowing that we're trying to get involved and we're engaged in these conversations with, for example, the Charter Review Commission around what their work is. We think that's totally appropriate and fine. And I think there was a little bit of pushback on that, but I think I think the Charter Review Commission took an appropriate response to deciding to proceed with some of their work with our advice and feedback. And I think on those levels, I think we're doing okay. So that was a long way of saying, I think we're okay.
Okay, and I'm glad you brought up the Charter Review. Actually, I'll be honest with you, Pancho, when I heard about the Charter Review Commission taking on part of that work, that was a real head scratcher for me. I'll be honest with you. With all the time, effort, and attention that we have spent putting together your group and what you've been tasked with, which is, you know, a pretty heavy, significant lift, and with the expectation of whatever you came out with in your group in terms of recommendations and guidance is what I was looking for. The Charter Review Commission already has a heavy lift in terms of the primary focus. And I'll be honest with you again, I'm concerned that taking on the additional work, that's work that I'm expecting to come from you and your group, is problematic for me. So I just want to get that out there. I have some real concerns, and I just feel like it's going to take away the focus from both groups, as well as the potential confusion of the community in terms of who they're communicating with, who they're getting information from, and it just, you know, makes it more confusing. It dilutes both efforts. So I just want to get that out there.
Thank you.
And I also want to ask Angel the same original question that I asked Pancho in terms of your assessment of how the process has been going.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. Yeah, I think as Poncho kind of outlined, you know, we know that pulling together this type of a structure is very labor intensive. And so I think you know, we're kind of at the point that I expected us to be at, you know, just given, you know, that we hit the reset button just, you know, on June 22nd. So I think we're in a situation where I think the community-led committee is ready to take some action. The structure, I think, has been finalized now for the most part. We are definitely providing any strategic support from a city perspective. As Poncho mentioned, I think the next order of business is really to solidify any additional consultant support that the committee would need. And of course, as I said back in June, you know, I think one of the challenges as the group works towards formulating some recommendations along those four scope areas is to make sure that the recommendations really are recommendations that can be implemented, that are vetted in a way that they're not so difficult to implement that it can kind of reinforce or produce, you know, frustration amongst the group, right? And so I think we got to kind of ground these recommendations in you know, being bold and practical, and at the same time make sure that they're viable. We have learned from other cities that are embarking on this that you could come up with some pretty some pretty bold recommendations, but if you can't implement them, then you're kind of back to ground zero, right? So I think that's the challenge that we're going to have, and we knew that going into this, but I think right now the group is structured for success.
Great. Thank you, Angel, and both Angel and Pancho. Thank you for your dedication and commitment to this effort, and I'm looking forward to actually additional dialogue. I don't know, Chair, if I can, as part of the motion to accept the report, is I'd like to see them come back in 2 months to give us another update.
So Councilmember Jones, it is on the November agenda for a more robust report already on the work plan.
All right. Well, hey, if I checked my work plan, I would have known that. So thank you, Jennifer.
We'll take that as a motion if we can get a
We'll
second.
take that as a motion.
Second.
And then I'll go to Councilmember Arenas. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that you're still in the process, and I'm going to try to get my video back on, but I did freeze earlier. I feel like it's rude when I don't have my video on, so I apologize if I do freeze. I'm going to turn it off. First of all, I just want to thank you for your support. I'm really happy to see you involved in this, Poncho, and that there's this is really truly community driven, which is, I think, the point of having this conversation, right? One of the things that I think you were here from the beginning of the meeting, correct? So one of the things that we typically, when we think about reimagining the community safety and police reforms, we think about maybe violent altercations between police and our residents. But I also want to encourage you to include interface with gender-based violent crime, so that it runs the spectrum. It is not exclusive, because based from what the IPA report last year said, that there was a predominantly, and I can't remember what the percentage was, but there was a pretty high percentage, and they noted it as such, between people of color, and mainly men of color, and the police department. And so when we think about these police reform work plans, I don't want it to be just very male dominated in terms of the conversations, simply because that's maybe who is interacting with our police department, but that it's comprehensive, and it includes, it kind of runs the gamut, and includes all genders that we are recognized are part of our community and live with us. So anyways, I just wanted to make sure that I just put that in your ear. Aside from encouraging you to recruit from my Welch area, and this is a perpetual crime gang spot, and there's also a hardworking neighborhood association that has a Project Hope, thanks to our vice mayor who reignited these neighborhood rehabilitation programs. And so I'm really happy that we have that there. And there's a lot of community members that have been working with Project Hope to connect with our government, and hopefully maybe in this committee, I don't know. But ultimately that's, I think, who you're looking for, and hopefully you don't forget our Welch area. It's kind of forgotten because it's on the exterior of the east side, and it's cut off from all agencies. There isn't an agency that anchors it and that provides support. And so I'd really like for you to consider that, or Meadow Fair, which is they're both Meadow Fair and Welch are a perpetual crime and gang spot. But anyways, so that's my selfish promotion, but only because I know who my community is, and I think that they will benefit from being part of this, and that you and our city will benefit from their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Arenas. I'll just to quickly respond. We're excited to be able to talk with other folks in the community. We want to be able to do some neighborhood-based outreach, and we're looking to the Neighborhoods Commission in part, and those representatives actually help us with that. As in addition to, it's not just who's on the committee, it's like how we're informing the process and having lots of voices and being able to have some dialogues in different communities. So it'd be really exciting to work with you and your team and other members of this committee and the council to how do we have some community-based conversations and reaching out to folks, and we want to do that. But to the point of gender-based violent crime and looking at that, a majority of the representation, the voting representation on this are women, and we are planning on actually having one of our sessions is going to be a learning session looking at gender-based violence. And so I think one of the appointee organizations was Next Door Solutions to Domestic Violence, and they appointed Darcy Green as the representative, and she and others are working on creating a session that's going to be diving deep into that topic, including alternative responses that wouldn't include necessarily law enforcement having to respond to everything. What are things that make communities safe in the first place, and what are other things that we have to do when it does happen? So we'd love to make sure we'll communicate with folks about the timing of that as well. So I'll follow up with your team.
Great. And so we'll follow up offline, but I hope that there's other organizations that like Nextdoor or Community Solutions or YWCA as well that are involved in these conversations. They all cater to kind of a slightly different clientele. One is a rape crisis center. Others are exclusive to intimate partner violence, and so these are nuanced differences, but and some of these may have some crossovers, but I'd love for it to all be represented. So thank you, Poncho. Thank you for the consideration.
No, and thank you for that direction. We will definitely be working with it. We at Sacred Heart work with all the members of the Domestic Violence Advocacy Consortium in our work around homelessness prevention, and we'll definitely make sure that they're brought into that conversation to help with those presentations.
All right, thank you. Just a couple questions for me, and appreciate the update as well. I had similar questions to our vice mayor, so I'm glad to hear where progress is at right now. Poncho, you had mentioned that you were waiting on a couple of the neighborhoods commissioners. Looking at the report, is that the same as the 2 Mayor's Gang Prevention hotspot areas, or no? Are those still outstanding?
We're still waiting to get those nominees. I think there were 3 that were vetted, by the city manager's office, who are going to be able to send them over to us. And so we're hoping to get our steering committee started, and we're gonna determine how we're going to be able to take action on that in the next few weeks.
Okay, and I know one of the areas is Jeannie, happens to be in District 3. Do you need help identifying, or maybe a question as well for Angel, identifying some potential applicants or interested neighbors to fill those spots, or do you think you have that, you just need to narrow it down now?
Yeah, council member, I believe we have the right nominations in terms of filling the spots. And as Poncho mentioned previously, in addition to these individuals that will be serving directly on the committee, there's also going to be extended outreach into many other neighborhoods, including Jeannie and many others. The 3 that are just right on the verge of being onboarded represent Winchester Cadillac, Valley Palms, and the Santee community. So I think we're going to be solid there. I think we have really good neighborhood representation, and we've already connected leaders from the community coalition to Project Hope and Gang Task Force hotspots. So I think we're good.
Okay, that is positive news. The only other concern that I had, a new one, but Vice Mayor had brought up the other, which was in regards to the Charter Review Commission, which I would agree with the Vice Mayor's sentiment on that. I think we were looking for this task force, right, to really put forward some very thoughtful recommendations. The Charter Review Commission has a broad sort of task of what they're looking at. Ultimately, there may be some charter changes, but I think we really want those recommendations to come out of the work that this body's doing. So, I think we wanted to focus. That's all. I'll echo his comments there. But my other concern was actually in regards to how we're making any access or availability to some of these meetings or conversations for others. As you were saying, Poncho, that neighbors that want to participate or others, and Angel, you were just talking about right now about putting the broad or access to others through committee. So is this something that we will be promoting? Are the meetings going to be recorded? I know obviously just because of the new setup, I'm curious on that and ensuring that that we could have some participation.
Yeah, so at Chair Perales, I just want to respond that we actually have been, the meetings have been open to the public. We've been doing them, via Zoom. We've had interpretation, both, and others for them and making them available. We've been letting people know about them. They have been recorded. They are on the city's website, at least the first 3 meetings that have taken place. And so that process is happening. And certainly if you want to continue to promote that, we are doing something a little bit different though. We're not utilizing the same kind of structure that you have in terms of webinar version. We're using a normal version, so anyone in the community is able to kind of come in and participate. And so we're doing it a little bit less controlled and contrived version than what you typically are doing, which is fun. But one of the things that but to respond to your the other point about the Charter Review Commission, we actually believe that that their work, because their work is working on a timeline that's going to be completed sooner than ours. We are slated to complete our work in the spring. There is some concern about whether or not, if things would be part of a package of things that the City Council would be wanting to put before the voters in June, that not being able to hit that window. But what we are definitely involved, we're definitely engaged in that. We've been promoting that with our committee members to participate and watch and study both the working sessions, one that happened on August 23rd, another one happening on the 27th of this month. And there will be a public hearing happening, I believe, I think it just got settled yesterday, that'll be on November 6th, where there will be considering some of these conversations around that. We are looking at our role as being involved, engaged in shaping and forming that. And if we have concerns about it, that will come out. We had dozens we had almost a couple hours of testimony at the Charter Review Commission saying, from community members, including many of us, saying, no, continue your work. We're going to work with you. That's your role, is looking at the structure of the city. They're not looking at policies that, they're not looking at policies, they're not looking at other things, but it's a structural issue, and we think that would be helpful and constructive. But we are monitoring it very closely. And if we have issues with the direction that they're doing, if they feel it's not responsive to the community, you'll know.
Okay, good to know. And I'll just ask maybe on the city's end, because I know in looking for trying to find the time, the agenda through the city's website as it is posted there, it is a little buried. It's kind of hard to find. So I don't know if there's a way that we can try to remedy that. We have pointed some people to that are interested, and then even my own staff, when we tried to locate it, it was a little challenging. So if there's a way that we can try to remedy that, obviously once we have the info, we can share it. But if you're just general public and you hear about the meetings and you want to participate, it is a little difficult to find.
Yes, council member. This is Peter Hamilton, assistant to the city manager. I can, I think, help address that issue. So, and we've heard this feedback from other folks as well, that it's the agendas are currently being posted under the miscellaneous meetings category in the agenda website, which as you point out, can be challenging to find. So we are working with the clerk's office to, like many of our other commissions, have these agendas posted under their own kind of separate page that would be listed on the website, so that they are easier to locate.
I appreciate that. Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, that's all my comments. Appreciate the update. Look forward to hearing back in November. Councilmember Arenas? Oh no, same. Okay, old hand. All right. We have a motion and a second. If we can get a roll call vote, please.
Arenas,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Mahan,
Aye.
Jimenez,
Yes.
Corrales.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to item D3, our police department duty manual updates status report.
Hi there, guys. It's my name's Jaime Jimenez. I'm a lieutenant with the San Jose PD's SAIU. I'd like to say hi to the city manager. Congratulations, and all the council members present, my chief officers present, and also want to let everybody know that YWCA Lindsay Mansfield's here with us. She's part of the YWCA leadership. And at the end of the presentation, we also have Lieutenant Anderson from SVU and Lieutenant Rob Lang from Family Violence Unit as well, so they can help us answer any questions we may have. And without further ado, Angela Montessa, our crime and intelligence analyst, will go over the presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here today again to present to you a status report regarding the San Jose Police Department's duty manual updates. My name is Angela Montessa, and I am a crime and intelligence analyst with the department's Sexual Assault Investigations Unit. In March of this year, the department presented a report regarding updates that were made to the department's duty manual as directed by the City Council with its approval of a memorandum from Councilmember Arenas on August 18th, 2020. The report updated the committee on duty manual amendments that achieved the following two objectives. The first is to require officers to respond to and investigate all calls for service for domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, and human trafficking for potential high lethality, and write a police report if a crime occurred. And two, to ensure a trauma-informed approach to an officer's response by providing survivors with access to an in-person advocate and/or a referral to such advocate by telephone, pamphlet, or resource card before the officer leaves the scene. The department reviewed and revised duty manual sections related to sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, elder or dependent adult abuse, and human trafficking, bringing the department into compliance with best practices. SAIU, SVU, and FVU coordinated on these duty manual amendments. The revisions and additions were implemented through various means. To begin implementation, the department's research and development unit sent a department-wide email with the listed duty manual updates. Department members are obligated to understand the content of the policy changes, and supervisors have the responsibility to ensure any new policy is understood and being implemented. Other measures to ensure that department members understood the changes in policy also included SAIU, SVU, and FVU personnel to instruct their prospective academy learning domains to ensure new police recruits are being trained by personnel who are assigned to the units and who investigate the cases that are being taught. The academy courses now being taught by members of SAIU, SVU, and FVU include crimes against children taught by SVU, sex crimes taught by SAIU, and domestic violence taught by FVU. Members of SAIU, SVU, and FVU have participated in training for patrol personnel as part of the Bureau of Investigation's Mini Academy. To date, 2 BOI Mini Academy sessions have been conducted, reaching over 182 patrol officers. Personnel attended patrol briefings and sergeant staff to discuss and explain the changes in policy. Members of the same 3 units also review all of the patrol-initiated reports and make note when policies, such as duty manual updates, are not being followed. When officers fail to comply with new policy changes, those individual officers and their sergeants are contacted and mentored by the respective unit personnel. SAIU utilizes its monthly newsletter to also disseminate various types of information, including the duty manual amendments. There are occasions where in-person training is needed to implement the specific duty manual amendments, and these in-person trainings include CSO Community Service Officer training, dispatcher training, and main lobby officer training. As an immediate result of the implementation of duty manual revisions, the department experienced a 253% increase of referrals to the YWCA from SAIU between fiscal year 2019-2020 and fiscal year 2020-2021. Moving forward, the department is involved in a number of efforts that complement the duty manual revisions. The following discusses these related areas. SAIU personnel worked with the partner agencies to ensure that all children are offered medical care related to their sexual assault in a coordinated way. SAIU personnel recommended that all pediatric cases use the 10-day standard for SART referrals. This standard involves making a referral within 10 days of a suspected incident, instead of a hybrid approach that uses a 72-hour standard for children 0 to 11 and a 10-day standard for children aged 12 to 17. Applying the 10 days to all pediatric cases eliminates confusion and affords more children access to forensic examinations. The suggestion was well received by the pediatric medical team and was adopted by the department. FVU members have worked with the district attorney's office and the Domestic Violence Protocol Update Committee to update the Domestic Violence Resource Card. The card was updated and is expected to be published in English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Mandarin soon. SEIU members have worked with the District Attorney's Office, the YWCA, and community partners to revise the Sexual Assault Resource Card. The draft card has also been shared with members of the City of San Jose Auditor's Office, and the final product will be provided to the District Attorney's Office for final approval and implementation. The Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault, and Human Trafficking Assessment template established in Duty Manual sections L7307, R1536, and R1536.5, also known as the Intersectionality Tool, was implemented in January 2020. The purpose of the template is to ensure that survivors of intimate partner violence, who are also survivors of human trafficking, are identified and connected to the appropriate community service providers by the initial patrol officer or the assigned detective conducting an investigation. An audit of the intersectionality form in 2020 revealed the opportunity for system improvements, which could increase the human trafficking unit's probability of identifying and arresting human traffickers and automating analytical data. In early 2021, Councilmember Arenas asked if the department could expand the use of the intersectionality tool. As a result, the department is creating new policy to be able to use the intersectionality tool in cases involving DV, sexual assault, and human trafficking. The policy change is to have officers ask questions related to the intersectionality of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking in all cases of intimate partner violence reported to the department. We anticipate increase of the reporting of cases which would have otherwise not have been reported. SEIU and SVU personnel attended several SART committee meetings to create the duty manual section related to the investigation of non-investigative reports. Through collaboration, SEIU and SVU members were able to create policies for the department to document NIRs. In addition to community service officers being trained to collect the evidence, police call takers and dispatchers also received training on how to receive and dispatch NIRs. Lastly, this section was highlighted in Sexual Assault's newsletter. The implementation of the duty manual revisions and additions are a step forward in the department's provision of a trauma-informed survivor-centered approach. The department will continue to work with our advocacy and community partners in ensuring the highest level of support to our survivors of domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, and other vulnerable populations. Thank you for your time, and I shall now defer back to council for follow-up questions.
Thank you, Angeli. I appreciate the presentation. We'll go over to members of the public first. And just as a reminder, we're speaking on item D3, the Police Department Duty Manual Updates Status Report. And first up will be Tessa Woodman.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Well, it was interesting to hear throughout this afternoon about all the sexual assaults and the human trafficking and things like that. And these are really critical issues about the way we're designing our community to prevent these things is very important. And our general plan, the way you're working it with putting a hotel into our neighborhood, and that is potentially bringing these issues into our community where, you know, actually I sit in my kitchen and who passes by my window is many students from Bellarmine High School because we live right down the street from it and they're going to the Caltrain. And I've talked to the Bellarmine, the priest there, and had a good conversation when they were planning the larger hotel in our neighborhood. And he said, no, he wants housing.
Okay. You'll have to bring it back on track here.
Okay, good, Raul. I understand. We're talking about the problems in our community in terms of a lot of it is, you know, sexual assault and, like I said, you know, human trafficking. And these are the concerns of how we're building our community. And so we prevent that. We don't have the overtime of the police and things like that. We need to create resilient communities. And that's where you don't put hotels in neighborhoods that promote that kind of anonymity that brings that. It's the same thing of what like Paul Soto says, when you brought, X-rated movie theaters to make money, and the sexual assaults that he had to experience, as a young child. And so it's really how we're designing our communities is very critical to keep those things out of our neighborhoods, and ideally completely out of our neighborhoods. We shouldn't have any of that hotel or anything, but especially not putting that into our communities. And that's what you have done. And so, we're fighting that, but, basically, that's where, our general plan is so critical, and you have all the controls of that. You can't even protest it. If we protest it, basically you don't accept it.
Thank you. Next up will be Paul Soto.
I cannot tell you, Paul Soto from the Horseshoe, I cannot tell you how embarrassed I am. I've been accused of domestic violence, being a sexual assault victim. I mean, this is just, it's nuts. I don't see why the public can't speak about themselves. On March 3rd of this year, and I have the card right here in front of me because I've kept it with me, Officer Vieira reported to a sexual assault that I reported. Why? Because I was in a towel and a man reached for my genitals. I'm sorry, I got a problem with that. Number one, I don't want to have sex. Number two, I'm not gay. And this man came at me, and I did what I had to do, which every single woman in this world would be advocated to do. And that is scream, because you don't have a weapon. You don't have anything. I was begging. And Officer Vieira, he showed up and he said, no, you misunderstood. And I said, sir, on what premise are you making that judgment? Because you were not there. So how are you going to make a judgment that I misunderstood if you weren't there? He really actually tried to convince me that I was mistaken. Then I called YWCA. Help, please help. Help, I got this fucking shit that I fucking dealt with. Nothing, absolutely
Paul,
nothing.
Please,
Absolutely
just watch the
nothing.
language, Paul. Thank you.
What?
I said just if you can watch the curse language, please.
I cursed? Well, if I did, I apologize. Thank you for not cutting me off. I didn't mean to do that. As a result of that, the police department called up my probation officer and told him that because of my reaction to what happened to me, and they had me locked up. I did 45 days, man, in jail because of that. Because a police officer called and told my probation officer that I was.
Thank you, Paul. Next up will be caller with the last four digits of 5140. And as a reminder, please do watch the language. I did allow Paul to continue on because I know he was not directing that to anybody personally.
You don't have to lecture me about language and decorum. Who are you people to lecture anybody about that? You guys should be ashamed of yourselves for lecturing people. Don't you have enough power already? You want to control the speech now? Anyway, look at San Jose PD doesn't care if your car gets stolen. Are they going to really care if you're assaulted in any kind of way, physical, sexual? I mean, you guys are the ones who do the sexual assaults. I mean, I wouldn't sign a ticket. I got arrested, and that police officer grabbed my testicles. Now, I hope that this is okay for the city council, because we have to pretend like it's the 1600s in Massachusetts around here, because somebody might use bad language, or somebody even might want to drink a beer at 7 in the morning, or whatever. The complaints that you guys have about the public, you should be ashamed of yourselves. My balls were grabbed by the park police because I wouldn't sign a ticket. Can you believe that? I mean, who is this guy to fondle me with handcuffs on?
Mr. Sensini, you're going to have to stick to the topic at hand, please.
Well, you know what I'm getting at? Yeah. Way to interrupt when something gets good, right? When something's real, because you guys are the ones who do things like that. You don't care if people get assaulted. You just want to have some feel-good crap in these
that will
city
be
council
Mr.
meetings.
Sensini. Next up will be Blair Beekman, and Blair, please do stick to the topic
you
at hand.
shouldn't cut me off like that. I didn't drop any.
Thank you, Councilperson Perales. Tough couple weeks. This kind of thing happens in September and August. A point to really note that I really do try to stick to the topic, and I try to make really important points and concepts to what we're talking about. As abstract as I can be, I really try to keep it to focus to the agenda item. So for this item, I wanted to once again mention the concepts of peer review and the importance of it, and what the practices that we do with domestic violence issues can have a really good effect on the rest of the police department and how we build the future of the police department and the future of our community. I hope I can have this time to really apologize to Paul Soto. I mentioned his name at the beginning of this item at the beginning of the meeting. I mentioned his name only the story he described is exactly what I understood his story as. And for myself, I tried to describe that he got a bad deal, and that it's with the peer review program that he can get a better deal. We can learn what the mistakes exactly were in the process of what happened with Paul. And that's all I tried to say. I offered in a spirit of friendship and camaraderie. I didn't want to hurt his feelings at all. And I'm sorry to bring his story to the public process, and that would hurt him. I didn't consider that, and I'm sorry about that. And I hope we can apologize to each other and work toward our good process. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to my committee members. Don't see any hands up. Councilmember Arenas.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, very thorough. Thank you, Anjali. And thank you to our residents for continuously calling and informing us of and sharing their experiences. I know sometimes it's not in the perfect tone or the exact words that we want to hear, but I think the message, it comes across in terms of somebody trespassing their personal space, and I think that should be held at the same standard that for men as it is for women. And so I just want to say that to those folks like Mr. Soto, and I don't know Mr. Cincini, that I'm sorry to hear that these incidents have happened, and that there's always an opportunity for you to bring this up in terms, if you or anybody else has a complaint, we have an independent police auditor, and that is the process for those kinds of complaints. We don't try to cover them up. We don't try to cover anything up. We are being as transparent as possible. And in giving you this information, that continues on with that transparency. And so you are more than welcome to include those complaints if you so wish. But I'm gonna move on to these amendments that have been reflected in the memo and that I absolutely appreciate. They cover everything from physical child abuse to intimate partner violence, and I think this is a really good timing for all of this, because one of the things that the superintendents, especially those in the East Side, have expressed to me is concern about the wave of child abuse reports that are coming our way now that our children are in-person learning, and that they will have access to a safe and a trusting teacher or assistant or cafeteria worker, whoever it is that they may trust at school. And so I'm glad that we are dotting our I's and crossing our T's in terms of this duty manual. And I heard you, Anjali, say that there was a different ways for some of these updates to be relayed to patrol. You said in briefings or in, supervisors are responsible for relaying some of this these updates and for those updates to be understood. Does that happen? Can you break that down a little bit more? Because there's sometimes a discrepancy just in general in terms of what we think the rule is and then what the practice is, and sometimes those are two things. And I'm smiling because I think about it in my own life, not exclusive to the police department, but we all have these rules in our lives and in different segments of our lives, and sometimes what we think is a rule isn't really the rule, and that's not our practice. And so how can we ensure that this is actually the practice from there on, and that it's the benchmark?
So Councilmember Arenas, I'm going to defer to Lieutenant Jimenez to answer that question for you.
Hi, Councilmember Arenas. Thank you for the question. And we really appreciated this question because it did cause us to look at how we do it, right? Because we know how we do it, and we know it works, but we never really had to explain it in this fashion. So when we had this direction, it was kind of fun because we kind of researched, what are the rules, right? So myself and Rob Lang and Brian Anderson, as well as Steve Donahue, we started looking at the rules, right? And how does this all work, right? When we put out a policy, how does it all work out in the end? So it starts off like what's said in the memo and what was said in the presentation is the Research and Development Unit sends out an email that's department-wide, and there are some responsibilities for not only police officers, but sergeants and supervisors to basically learn these items, right, and put them into practice, right? So that's the first step. The second step is all the other things that we spoke about, and I'll speak about some, and I can elaborate wherever you want, because I don't want to talk in circles here. But one of the things that happens is recently, since we transferred in 2012 to our new report writing system, all of the reports are reviewed by sergeants at the patrol level, right? So there's a patrol sergeant that reviews every report, and usually any problems with policy are found at that level. Those same reports are also read in the Bureau of Investigations by sergeants here in BOI, right? In Bureau of Investigations. And what happens is when we see issues that maybe they're not following, the duty manual perfectly, right? Because we're all fallible, we're human, right? And things are new and sometimes we don't get it right. What we do is we reach out to people and we try to, inform them, right? And say, hey, listen, this is what we saw you write, and we want to make sure that we're clear that this is what you're supposed to do, and we make sure that that's not occurring in the future, right? So, and we've seen success in that. There's other things that we do. It's sergeant staff, where we go into sergeant staff where sergeants and lieutenants and shifts are present, so we can explain to them, right? Because being in person is really good to say, hey, listen, this is what the policy is. Do you have any questions, right? Because sometimes people read it, but they don't really understand it fully. We also attend briefings where we do the same, so officers can ask questions like, hey, listen, I'm not really understanding that. Can you explain it to me? Can you give me, an anecdotal story, or how would that look in this scenario? So we can, enforce the practices, right? And one of the things that we also did, and I'm gonna get off track and I'll continue to go, and please tell me when to stop. But we took over the learning domains in the academy for each specific unit, right? And I think that's really important, because one thing is learning what you're supposed to do, and the other thing is being like mentored and counseled on how does the department want this to look, right? And having, units, when we did our first training for our first academy, I did a 10-minute speech, and I kind of gave them an overview about what the expectation is, right? What is trauma informed? How do we, what does council want? What does Chief Motto want? What's BOI want to see? What's our Chief Washburn want? Like, what's, and we can really tell them, like, hey, this is what it's supposed to look like. Because, sometimes learning something for a test is different than how does that look when you put it into practice. So those are some of the things, and the other things are included in the memorandum. That wasn't exhaustive, but I don't want to give you a long-winded question or answer, but I think those are some of the things that we're trying to do to make sure that whatever the policy is, it's being followed, and that we have multiple ways of catching things that are not being followed, and multiple ways of intervening to make sure we get to where we want to go. And the reality is that most officers are pretty perceptive, and if they don't know, they ask a lot of questions, especially more recently. The younger officers ask a lot of questions, which is really good. From reading the reports, it seems like they're getting it right. And I can only speak in for SAU, and I don't know if Lieutenant Anderson or if Lieutenant Lang, if they want to add to what they're seeing in their respective units, but that's in general what I'm seeing. And I don't know if that answers your question, Councilmember Rennes.
I'm having just as much fun as you are. Lieutenant, I called you captain because I thought it was official already. I saw it in the presentation and I thought, well, I'm just going to start calling him captain. No, this is absolutely interesting. I'm glad that is as intriguing to you as it is to the rest of us who advocate, but may not be in your shoes or may have never been in your shoes in terms of the practice. And so I gain a lot of insight as you're sharing some of this breakdown. Yes, and you know, I'm glad that you're asking yourself these questions, and I'm going to bring up an incident only because I think it proves something, the point that we're talking about right now, and that's the IPA's 2020 report, year-end report, where they had, I think it was case number 17. And it was somebody who had come into the main lobby and this person wasn't provided a private location to file their complaint of sexual assault. And so we had already addressed this practice or this change, right? We had a change, and I think with some of the funding that the mayor had approved about 2 or 3 years ago, we provided some of that, I think, you know, some of the partitions or some of the funding for the actual changes. And so to me, I thought, well, it's already done, right? They know the practice. We helped with the environment. Now everything's gelling and it's taking place. But you spoke about how does it really look in real life and practice, right? And so I would encourage you to continue to ask those questions. I love that you're asking these questions. I love that you're exploring these, the training, the learning domains, and you're taking a look at that. You're really digging in, because this is an opportunity for us to really change these systems that may be archaic, and especially for women and men, as you heard earlier today, it's for both. And so there's a lot that gets translated into practice by choosing the right set of words, by relaying it in just the right way. And so for me, it's important that this be given enough practice, not just an email that goes out, because if it's anything like my email inbox, it's 10,000 emails, and sometimes when it's a little too long, I go to the top, I go to the bottom, I skim like we skim in our master's school, because we can't read all those peer-reviewed articles. Okay, now it's just post-traumatic stress syndrome from my master's, but this is part of what we deal with on a daily basis. Human beings, we sometimes are overloaded. Our police officers are working a lot and in overtime, and so I just want to make sure that you continually look at some of these practices that that you're using to have in real life examples, and taking this one step further. So I challenge you, Captain, to continue to do this, and to maybe get creative about how those things happen. This is a male-dominated field, and I completely recognize that. And within a male-dominated field, it is very different. I worked in a female-dominated field, which is nonprofits, for some time, and you hardly see males, and you miss that perspective that they bring in. And so I love seeing Chief Washburn here, because it really does add to some of the blind spots, if you will, or this lack of better word, but things that we may not think about because we just are not of that gender or just didn't have the same type of experience. So I really appreciate that. I made this comment in our first item, but I'll make it again, and I'll ask for specifically if we could figure out when that oh, I'm sorry, that's not the resource card. If we could, if we could integrate into the gender-based violence response and strategy work plan, the updates that you gave us right now that were on page 8 that don't really have a space for them in the work plan. You gave us kind of a bit of a just a one word update in the previous item. But this kind of update allows me to understand, oh, here you are with the intersectionality tool update, right, that I mentioned in the first item. And I said, hopefully that's moving along. And here in this report says it's moving along, right? So it kind of answers the question that I had in an earlier item. And just to put a little more finality there, I'm hoping that you can give me a date. Is there an approximate date, a target completion date for this intersectionality tool update?
Yeah, yes, Councilmember Rennes. So we heard you when you said what you said earlier in the year, and it resonated with us, right? It made a lot of sense. So we immediately started working on that. And in this case, Rob Lang did a lot of the work because it brings in domestic violence mostly. So, and I keep on saying SAU, and I hope everybody knows when I say SAU, that includes YWCA because they're one of our in-house partners. So when I say SAU, it also includes Lindsay Mansfield because a lot of the policies that we did, the YWCA reviewed a lot of it too, and we did seek their input. So I think it's important to know that as well. But to answer your question, it's pretty much done. So what happens, right? You create the policy, you make the document look different, you add the wording, you change some duty manual sections. It goes over to the city attorney's office for review, right? So all these things have been done. The last thing that we're waiting for essentially is and I don't know where it's at, and Steve may answer this, but we're moving it through the chain of command for review internally to make sure the chief officers are okay with what we're doing, right? And so I don't know where it's at in that point, but I would assume that wouldn't take very long, and that this would be something that we would be able to get approval for relatively quickly. My assumption is that the chief officers agree with us, and it'd go to print, right? And then once we go to print, it's relatively the time that we're waiting for is because remember the form is a paper form, but they have to automate it on the record management system side, which is something they can do relatively quickly because those people work in-house. So the answer is it's done, but all the little things that need to happen to make sure it goes forward, I couldn't give you an answer to because I really don't control that. I apologize. But I know Chief Washburn, you were listening in. I saw you shake your head in the affirmative. Maybe you have some information to add.
No, I think your original hunch, maybe Steve might be able to provide an update as to when the memorandum would be published to the chief officers. And, as far as the automation of it, obviously that would be for maybe BTS to report out on. But I think to your point, yes, the heavy lifting and the legwork for the investigative units and the collaboration with the YWCA, that much is done. Now it's just kind of operational logistics. Steve, do you have more?
Yeah, it's probably going to take another 4 to 5 weeks to get it off the ground if we get the AFR RMS system to be able to upgrade right away. The problem with what's happening with AFR RMS right now is we have some back-end upgrades that are being done, which may slow the process down in getting the digital copy out to the officers and being able to fill it out. So I can't promise the 4 to 5 week. That's why I said I wanted to get it done by the end of the year. I know we're going to get it done this fall. I just can't give you an absolute deadline based on these back end issues that are going to plague the process.
Thank you. No, that is enough of an update now. We'll leave it to bureaucracy of our government that sometimes, because we want to be efficient, we create these processes that sometimes take us a little bit longer, but we check off all our dot our I's and cross our T's. So that's wonderful. Now that we're talking a little bit about publication, when do you expect to have the card, the resource card, finalized? I think in the memo it has final approval, but would we be able to see it before it gets published?
From what I understand, Lieutenant Lang will actually be a best resource on this, but we did finish the cards and in multiple languages and sent them to the printer. Rob, can you talk on that?
Yes, hi, this is Lieutenant Rob Lang here. I apologize for no video. My Wi-Fi is very weak where I'm at right now, and I don't want it to crash. The cards, we worked with the District Attorney's Office and the entire group that does the domestic violence protocol for all law enforcement in the county. That entire group has been working on that over the last couple of months. We finalized it just very recently within the last couple of weeks. As mentioned before, we have it in 4 languages per the previous auditor's recommendations. So we have a full English version, a full Spanish version, a full Vietnamese version, and the fastest growing language in our area is Mandarin. So we have a full Mandarin version as well. Those forms they just recently got the form numbers on them for San Jose Police Department. They're getting ready to be shipped over to the printers, and we should have them very soon. The District Attorney's Office is about to release them as well for the countywide people. But I'll be back in November to do the DV update for the year. And at that time, I look forward to hopefully being able to tell you that they're already out on the streets. I think it's just a matter of hopefully no more than a couple of weeks at this point. But I hope to have very good news in 2 months when I speak to you again.
Wonderful, Lieutenant. Thank you so much. And it sounds like you might have mirrored what the DA was also doing, what the county was doing in terms of the resource card.
Yes, it was a collaborative effort. I sit on that same group, so it was all of the major players, and not just law enforcement. We got our advocate partners, and we got a bunch of different groups from throughout the county. So it's very thorough card, and a lot of updates were made to it. It's much improved.
I appreciate it, and the only reason I was asking is because there was a slight detail that our advocates didn't want on the resource card that I believe we had included, and it was based on another member of our council or the mayor. I can't remember who exactly, but anyways, they said that they didn't want that, and so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't within that card. But I'm guessing that if you followed what the county was expressing and the advocates were there with you, then I don't have to worry about that. And they probably crossed that T for me.
Yes, that I can confirm that. So I was on the meeting when the mayor brought that point up, and that was discussed with the district attorney's office with James Gibbons Shapiro. He's been leading the charge with that. And so that was in fact addressed.
Okay, wonderful. And then I think the last thing that I was going to ask is about going back to the training. I think in the report it has 558 officers. These are patrol officers that have been trained so far.
So, Councilmember Renz, if you don't mind, I'm going to take you back to the previous question, then answer this one second. So there's 2 resources cards that we're dealing with, right? So I just want to make sure that we're clear, right? So Rob Lang, there's a domestic violence resource card that's given to survivors of domestic violence and the strangulation cases. And on our side, there's a sexual assault card, right? So just want to make sure that we're clear that we're talking about 2 different cards that are in 2 different, they're at 2 different points, right? So Rob did a great job talking about his card with the domestic violence side. And I'll tell you a little about the sexual assault card. So Rob works with a different ADA, James Gibbons Shapiro on his side, and I work with Terry Harmon on our side, myself and Brian Anderson. Our card is essentially done, and like you said, it is a county card, right? So, but what we did was we incorporated what we were doing for our card, and we also satisfied some areas of the sexual assault bill of rights. I don't know, remember we're doing that in conjunction. So there's a lot of things going right. We have the bill of rights, we have requests from council, we have the auditors things. So we're trying to accomplish a lot of different things at the same time. So our card on the sexual assault side, we met with Lindsay and a bunch of other our partners and had input. So it was advocates did look at that. We made some changes based off what council wanted. And then we were presenting that. We actually already presented that to the DA's office. So they had some things that they had to do to finalize some words that they wanted to change and just do some research. So we're meeting with them next week. They're going to show us what the final card is, and we're going to collaborate. So
great.
I can ask Terry Harmon to reach out to you if you'd like and see if she can show you the card before she finalizes it. But at the end of the day, it's a county card. So whatever the county decides to do with it, we're making a lot of recommendations, and we did tell them what all the different things that are going on.
Perfect. It sounds like you and Lieutenant Lang were on the same page, even though we were talking about two different cards. He recognized that there was this issue that was brought up by advocates and made sure to share it. So I'm really grateful. I know that you are all on the same page, and I'm not trying to test you, but just trying to make sure that I keep my word to our advocates, and that I committed not to having some of that language, as they didn't see it victim-centered. Talking about advocates, I'm going to create my own segue here. I know one of the things that we wanted to take a look at for, our commitment for continuous improvement is to have all of the kind of measurable outcomes aligned with some of our advocates and within our unit, so that we are all taking a look at the same thing. And so I know that this duty manual update is one step towards creating that, right? And we're all doing the same thing, or we're taking this specific response. But I think we also need to take a look at that alignment of measurable outcomes, and I know the auditor also alluded to this in his report. And so I'm hoping that we can, I'm going to make a motion and then approve the report, and include that our city manager add to our police department duty manual update status reports, and to the gender-based violence response and strategy work plan. I know it's a mouthful. To include this remaining kind of unresolved item on the alignment of measurable outcomes. And then I think it would be great for us to continue to have a little bit more information other than, approved or completed on that work plan when we have the bi-monthly reports. Like you did in this report on page 8, you reflected like the status on the resource cards, the intersectionality tool update, a little bit more information on the non-investigative reports, just so that, I'm probably, this would probably answer my questions and I wouldn't have to ask the 101 during PISFIS, and I'm sure the chair would really appreciate that. So I'm hoping that the motion can include that, so that we can have these kinds of updates in the report, and to have a bit of a rundown, if you will, on some of the items, versus just having ongoing or in progress or completed, because I think like the bi-monthly report is completed. It just says completed. Obviously, it's an ongoing item. Okay, so that is my motion.
Second.
Thank you. And is that it for you, Councilmember Dennis? Yes.
Yeah, actually, the non-investigative report. Okay, one more. The non-investigative reports. I know, Chair, but the one thing that stood out for me is like the non-investigative reports that are being done by our my gosh, not our police department, but our, help me out, Lieutenant Jimenez, Captain.
So yeah, so it's our advocates and our SAFE team, right? They are so NIRs, non-investigative reports, law enforcement doesn't get involved in those, and our advocate teams and our medical teams are the ones that process those things and get them over to us for on the evidence side of the fence, and we store the evidence and we do that type of stuff. But I don't know if you have a specific question related to that.
Yeah, so when those non-investigative reports happen, or somebody indicates that they don't want to investigate, does this get kind of detoured over to our community service officers, or are the community service officers just taking some of that, doing some of that paperwork or documentation, and then eventually it gets either set on, goes back to the unit, and the unit just archives it or something until that survivor is ready? I guess I'm trying to figure out what is that role of that community service officer, and then the type of training that they're being offered, I'm hoping is the same that the rest of our patrol and investigative units are offered, so that they can deal with it the same way.
Yeah, right. So the CSOs were brought on board to help alleviate officers' responses, because it doesn't require an interview of the survivor, right? Because the survivor doesn't want to talk to the police at that point, right? So rather than making a patrol officer go there, and what was happening was the SAFE team was saying, hey, like sometimes police officers are delayed, and that's understandable. So we used the addition of a CSO to basically try to get there sooner, right? So that nurses wouldn't have to wait for police officers, and it would help us expedite it, right? So what the community service officer does is get any reporting information, writes a police report, collects any evidence that was collected, books it into evidence, and basically gets the case to the point where we can have all the information we need to have in the event that the survivor changes her mind or his mind later, right? So that we can investigate the case. So we've made a lot of changes to do that. And in regards to training, what we did was SAU specifically trained all the existing CSOs. We gave them a 2-hour block of training on where's the location they're going to go to, what are the types of questions they need to ask, where does the evidence need to go to. And we really broke it down so that they can understand, have the opportunity to ask questions, and really understand. And then what we do now is we attend every new CSO academy. We attend the academy and we provide the 2-hour training. And we had been asked, hey, do you want to just transfer the training to the CSOs? And we said, no, we want to keep it, because we want to make sure things change, right? So we want to make sure that SAU, the detectives who are really experienced, have the ability to do that. And when the training needs to be changed or modified, we can do that as well.
Perfect. Last question is, I'm back to my point that I made earlier on this item, and that is child abuse reports that are going to overwhelm the system. And in the grand scheme of things, if there's a sexual assault or a robbery in progress, or something of that sort that creates for that child abuse report to go lower in the queue. Chief Mata, we talked about this, and I'm hoping that we can have a follow-up, and maybe the chair could also lead this conversation with us on how the protocol will accommodate some of these child abuse reports that our administrators are expecting, and how do we work with one another so that they can feel that there's progress and they're not waiting on somebody, because timing is of the essence when the survivor's ready to talk.
Thank you, Council Member. Yes, we had those discussions in terms of, especially when it comes to schools, when it's out of school and the survivor is at the residence, then like anything else, we'll respond there. But when they're at the school, and again, it all depends on resources and what the priority calls are in that area where an officer will respond. And for the schools, that's something that we'll reach out with school liaison to see what that would look like and how they would report it, just like normal to 911, as opposed to an officer that's on site. And try to get our resources there as soon as possible. And kind of like the discussions that we had, if they're not available and the survivor goes home, I think that's maybe something where, or goes to a different location. That's where I think we need to obtain that information at the front end. So we, when the officer is available, we're able to send the officer to where the survivor is located at.
And the majority, if we take a look back at the majority of the pattern and trends, usually they're children under the age of 13, and then the second category is children between 13 and 18 or 16. And so most of the time there isn't a school liaison for elementary school. For elementary schools, the liaisons are thought to be more on high school campuses. And so are you saying that you would extend those liaisons to the elementary schools?
The liaisons also work with elementary schools. So we can definitely, look at that and again, expand that to include those schools and those districts. But more importantly is to get the school administrators to report, give us a call, and then we'll work on our end at our 911 center to get those specific for follow-up.
Great. Well, I would love to include this in my motion. I'll leave it open, Chair, because you're in charge of our work plan for committee, but I'd like to carry on with this conversation. I think there's details that we need to connect in terms of could CSOs respond if there isn't any police officers that are available and the need is now, or how do we work with the county to make sure that they may cover this through their child advocacy center liaisons there. I just think that there's some options to explore here. And so I'll leave it open, but I'm interested in carrying on with this conversation. We're with the second month of school. And I'm sure that our kids are feeling a lot more comfortable in person, and soon enough we'll start seeing a huge wave of reports. And I fear for our children, and hope that sometimes our bureaucracy gets in the way, and I don't want that to happen.
All right, thank you. Next up will be Vice Mayor Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep it brief. I wanted just to commend Councilmember Arenas. From the moment she served on the council, she's been tenacious in her advocacy for against domestic violence and child abuse and sexual assault, and just protecting families. So, I just wanted to get it out there that, I respect and admire all of your hard work and dedication. And also that you should feel proud that, we've seen significant progress. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but as far as, your legacy and what you have accomplished on the council, you should be very proud. And I also want to commend also the police department and all the nonprofits and everyone else who's been involved in trying to make our community safer and our families safer and our children safer. So again, I just want to get that out there. Chair, I gotta go. And so I'm not gonna be able to stay for the last item. And I don't know about my colleagues, but I want to make a request if we can defer the last item to the next committee meeting. I'd like to make that request, because unless, my colleagues are able to stay, and you'll still have a quorum.
Let me check with Councilmember Mahan. Are you? I'm good until 5. We're pushing that limit pretty closely here.
Yeah,
but
yeah, I'm also good until 5.
Councilmember Arenas? Yeah, okay. We'll carry on then, but we will. I just had. Were you done with this item, Councilmember or Vice Mayor?
I was done.
All right.
And here, can I just say thank you to Vice Mayor? Thank you for saying that. I smiled because you said tenacious, and I know that I'm pretty persistent on this, and so last time we had this bi-monthly report, these guys made me cry in terms of the changes that they were making. I'm absolutely grateful to all the hard work, because I know it's not just these reports, but it's a lot of conversations and taking a look at things very differently. And so I really appreciate it, and thank you for your leadership, Chief Mata, because I know that it has to begin with the top. And so Lieutenant Jimenez and Anderson and Donahue and Lang, I don't see him, but everybody has added to that picture, and so I'm really proud and grateful to my colleagues here in PISFIS. So anyways, I just want to say that. Thank you.
So I had a question just in regards to the motion to make sure that PD is comfortable with what and clear on what it is that you need to bring back in the bi-monthly updates.
Are you asking restate or?
Oh no, I wanted to make sure that PD was both comfortable and clear on what it is that they need to bring back within the next bi-monthly.
Thank you, Councilmember. It sounds like, Councilmember Arenas, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you want just a little more information on each one of those work plan items, similar to what Lieutenant Jimenez did in his memo, with just a line or two to let you know where each one of them is in the actual item. Does that sound right? That's no problem. We can do that. I do ask though, because I'm the guy that does the bi-monthly report. If you're going to ask in-depth questions, I am not the sharpest pencil sometimes. So just give me a heads up, and we'll make sure to have Lieutenant Jimenez here to answer your questions.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. It sounds like it is with Lieutenant Donahue, but recognizing you're not the jack of all trades on all these issues. So appreciate that. And then I'll just mention as a former school resource officer for 6 years, the #1 report that I took on campus was sexual assault related. And so I do know that it's a loss to schools to not have SROs on campus. And again, things to think of, right, as some of these decisions were made and maybe the implications were not completely thought out ahead of time. But I know that was the #1 report that I took as an SRO, unfortunately. So, okay. We have a motion and a second. If we can do a roll call vote, please.
Arenas?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Mahan?
Aye.
Jimenez?
Yes.
Peralez?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That moves us down to our last item, item D4, our workers' compensation program annual report. And we do have just over 10 minutes. And so if we could be brief on the report, and then I'm going to have to limit public comment for the duration of the meeting to 1 minute.
Thank you. We are also open to not doing the presentation and just answering questions, but Eric is here, and Eric can present and do it quickly if you'd like us to do so.
I'm comfortable with that. I'll ask my colleagues. I have reviewed the presentation. I used to have some issues with this, as staff knows. I'm comfortable with the latest reports that have come forward. We made all the big decisions a couple years ago. So I'm comfortable with that. Would any of my colleagues on the committee prefer to see the presentation? Sounds like no, that was part of the packet. So we will go over to members of the public. And again, this is public comment on item D4, the Workers' Compensation Program Update Annual Report, and you will have 1 minute. We'll start off with Paul Soto.
Yes, I went to the meeting by which these compensation packets are approved or disapproved. And I would just ask that maybe a little bit more oversight because it looked and sounded very like, especially for something this critical. There really was no analysis, no challenge, no, oh, okay, yeah, what's this, okay, but, and it just for my comfort level, it was a little bit too suspicious because of that, how comfortable and how like methodical and like this is expected. You just give it to them, you know, and this is going to be a lot of money coming in the next few years, and there isn't a whole lot to put in there in terms of taxes to compensate for that. Is my concern.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Blair Beekman.
Hi, thank you, Blair Beekman here. You've done some interesting work with city government pay raises recently. I think you can be good examples for the VTA that very much need good such examples at this time. Hopefully this item can help. Berkeley and Oakland, East Bay cities are looking into the same sorts of changes to their pay rate raises at this time for city government workers. Good luck. With 34 seconds, how this relates to COVID issues. I think it's really important this fall that we have a better conversation about the vaccine passport process, and that can be manageable for, and the vaccine process that can be manageable for, we can have choices and creative good choices. You know, weekly COVID tests can be an acceptable system at this point, I feel, for some who are just genuinely uncomfortable with the process. Can you learn to make that process more open and accessible this fall? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker will be caller with the last 4 digits ending in 5140. Mr. Sensini, please unmute using *6. Thank you.
Once again, you know, Zoom doesn't work very well, does it? Well, you guys bought it from a company in San Jose that says it all. You should fix this Zoom, really. I mean, I hit *6 how many times, doesn't work. Yeah, I'd like to see the transparency of workman's comp claims, especially for police and fire. I could just imagine you guys probably had to take a workman's comp claim for getting your feelings hurt out there. I guarantee it. And yeah, I'd like to see more transparency regarding workman's comp. It's a huge sum of money, and then, you know, police and fire are really famous for going out on that retirement disability with that injury that they have, and then go run a marathon during their retirement. It's been done. It's been done. But yeah, just we need more transparency for workman's comp claims, because this city is not going to be able to afford all the health care, workman's comp, and retirement.
I think you are. Last speaker will be Tessa Woodman.
Thank you. Just thinking about preventing problems for our police. And I've been really thinking that we need to have the police walking the beats and out of their cars. A lot of the times when they're chasing, you know, criminals or whatever, you know, there's a lot of accidents that happen. I mean, people have been killed as they shoot into the Trader Joe's to stop, you know, criminals or something, and or whatever they think they are, proposed criminals they think they are. And so this type of chasing in cars is wrong. And so I think that also that we need a lot more presence in our community to really find out what's going on and to fix things in our community. And even in terms of COVID, if there was a lot more police working around and telling people to wear masks, you know, I think that would be helpful and, you know, be an example of that. And, you know, so I think we really need our police to be walking the beats of our neighborhood and fixing things as they come across them.
Thank you. We'll go back to the committee director, or excuse me, Councilmember Mahan.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be super brief. Thank you for the detailed memo. Really was happy to see the nearly $1.4 million savings against the modified budget. That I presume is all good news. I was trying to just understand in there, and yeah, it's great. Well done. Trying to understand if you, I don't know if you can know this, but to what extent that may be due to more work from home and just sort of COVID specific changes versus other preventative measures or initiatives that we're undertaking. Is there any way to disentangle that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Mahan, for that question. Yeah, I think it's a combination of a lot of different efforts. I mean, certainly people staying at home, but police and fire remain our highest exposure when it comes to number of claims and total costs. I mean, they make up roughly 15 million of that 19 million, as an example, as you saw in the report. So I think one of the initiatives that has really helped is the fast lane that we rolled out with the firefighters and then with police. It was received very well by the department. The feedback from the officers and the firefighters has been very positive. We've adopted the firefighter program, fast lane program, last year as an ongoing program. And the pilot program for police, we plan on adopting that as an ongoing program. So, and then I think a big piece is really the relationship with Intercare. And to Chair Peralez's point, that whole transition was messy. And I think we've really developed some really excellent processes and protocols to ensure that our employees are taken care of. And they've done a good job in terms of the cost containment programs. And so I think we're seeing the savings that we're seeing are, you know, a result of all of those different measures.
Right. Well, thanks for all that extra context, and I'm glad to hear that. Really positive. Sounds like things are going in a great direction there. Appreciate again the very detailed memo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And on the preventative end, I'll just add, because it came into context for conversations today. Staffing is also a major issue when we're not staffed up adequately. All the overtime that we were talking about, people working, right? One of the things in the police department that used to be a regular opportunity when I was on the force, when we had 1,400 officers, was the ability to do physical training, PT, before or after work, you know, and using an hour beginning of shift or an hour end of shift and being able to use that time. There are those opportunities were brought back. You know, they went away for a number of years. They were brought back, but minimally, and they're not utilized as often because there's just so much work to do, and you have to get out there, and you don't have the time to do that. And so, again, staffing for a number of reasons, right, will play a toll in this. Councilmember Arenas?
A question about if somebody gets hurt in their home while during work hours, where does that place us?
Yeah, that would be considered compensable. If the injury arose out of employment or was in the course of employment, for example, repetitive motion injuries, right, with people working on their sofa at home and not necessarily having the right setup. If they get injured, and then that would be presumed to be work-related. Obviously, an investigation would ensue and statements would be collected. We would also obtain a doctor's statement in terms of what are the objective findings, diagnosis, prognosis, and was it the mechanism of injury? Did it occur at home? So all of those come into play when we investigate claims.
Got it. Okay. I thought maybe the coverage would be a little different. And so the last thing I just wanted to include is in the wellness screening, I love that you're all taking a look comprehensively at a person, not just their you know, physical environment and ergonomics, but the overall wellness of people, because it adds to blood pressure, it adds to, you know, chronic conditions. And so I know this last year, all of us have dealt with a lot of pressure. And so this is social emotional. And I hope that, you know, with the wellness screening, you know, that you are covering the whole person, that you also include something that's social emotional, as our employees have all dealt with the pandemic in different ways and have seen maybe loss of family members or even maybe employees or people in their community. And so I wanted to make sure that we don't lose sight of that, because that could really impact the well-being of our employees once we're back in person.
Couldn't agree more, Councilmember Arenas, and that's why we are taking a concerted effort with benefits and with the health and safety to come up with a comprehensive program to be able to address that.
I was just going to add that we have a whole other comprehensive wellness program outside of workers' comp that we're working on that includes all of those different aspects you mentioned.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I ask you for a motion, Councilmember.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right. If we can get a roll call vote, please.
Arenas?
Yes.
Mahan?
Aye.
Jimenez? Peralez.
Yes,
Thank you.
we're narrowly at a quorum here, so thank you for passing that item. We're now at the final item, open forum, and everybody will have 1 minute. First up will be Tessa Woodman.
Okay, great. Well, getting back to general safety issues of our community, I think we need to, like we've been talking about in our charter commission, which got aborted, or because nobody wants to talk about our climate crisis, because we really have to do, it has to be a transformational change in the way we live. And so, but getting back to the safety issue of this commission, is that we need to put that into all of our departments, of the issue of how we're going to adjust and mitigate and build our resilient communities in regards to the horrific things that are coming our way. And that is what we have to start doing, and to care for the people and prepare for what is coming. And that's what the science says. We are going to get more storms and floods, and we are in the path of the worst case scenario of our IPCC, the worst case scenario. So we need to prepare.
Thank you. Next up will be Paul Soto.
I'm getting confused as to what like justice looks like. I mean, those cops called my probation officer after I gave my piss testimony about my treatment. I was locked up. I did 45 days out of my life. My probation officer still won't tell me what cop called. This is serious, man. And yet I still didn't allow that to take me away from these meetings. I give my life to these meetings, and every single person on this panel knows that. I'm talking hours. I'm talking tens of hours. Disrespected. I get cops called on me. You, Peralez. I'm sitting there getting triggered by these kids being beaten in juvenile hall. You didn't even take the courtesy to review that film before you screened it, but yet you had 15-year undercover cop homeboys come and arrest me and embarrass me inside that movie theater. You know that's exactly what you did to me, man. And I still...
Thanks, Paul. We have next up Blair Beekman.
Hi, I hope Paul's made clear we have to work on clear peer review programs in the future, that they're good programs. I'm very sorry that my words have upsetted earlier today. A quick reminder that about the Reimagine Task Force, they have a 6-month deadline to work with. With the upcoming COVID-19 economic forum that's going to be happening through the city, I think it'd be important for the Reimagine Task Force to be around and to have a part in that process. I think it'd be really interesting and helpful. It is bringing all parts of the community together. With 17 seconds left, I hope you can practice and add the ideas of open democracy to reimagine and equity that the task force will be studying. It's really important, good work, and we can all do this together. Thank you.
All right, our last speaker will be caller with the last 4 digits, 5140.
Yeah, I mean, I really hate it if more people called in. You people down there wouldn't be able to handle. You can't even handle Paul Soto dropping an F-bomb, man. What else can't you handle? What else won't you do? Peralez, you're a teacher, a city council person, a cop. 3 strikes, you're out, man. You're used to controlling people's behavior. You want to control what I say. You want to control my tone, my decorum. You should be ashamed of yourself. Why don't you and I have a meeting together face to face, and like a man, you can tell me about what I can and can't say at a city council meeting. Keep in mind, all you people down there have a bowel movement every morning because of taxpayers. Okay, so you guys should get your act together and let people express themselves in these meetings, and don't treat it like it's a 3rd grade classroom. This isn't romper room. This is real life stuff. You guys don't get it. I want to know when.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good afternoon.